is in context of lean startup and customer development. But it is a systematic process from going from, or iterating from that plan A that you start with to one that works before running out of resources. So running lean is really a synthesis of three other ideas or methodologies: customer development, lean startup, and bootstrapping. And it's good to see that a number of you have already had some exposure to some or all of these. And so I'm not going to get into a lot of depth, but I will talk about the key takeaways from each to communicate the big ideas in them. So customer development was a term that was coined by Steve Lang, who teaches at Stanford and Berkeley. And prior to that, he has been an entrepreneur, has started 8 or 9 startups. I don't know how many, but he had a big exit, and now he's mostly teaching. But in the course of building startups, one of the things he realized is that the way we traditionally build products is broken. We have this requirements phase where we go out and get specifications, get requirements of what it is we need to build, and then we go away for several weeks, months, and sometimes years at a time building the stuff, only to find out that what we built was something that was either not the right product, or we went astray, or something happened along the way. And so he coined this term customer development to kind of bring the importance of doing a parallel customer and product development in a track that goes kind of side by side. And that's what customer development is. So the big key takeaway from customer development is getting out of the building. And so all the answers that you have are not on your computer, they're not in the lab. You actually have to get out and face and interact customers to get these answers. And one of the key messages there is that, again, it's not just at the tail ends of the product development cycle. It's not just when you first when you first look for requirements or when you launch your product, but throughout that process, you have to find a way to involve the customer in that process. And we'll talk about some techniques and tactics for doing that. But that's the one key message that I'd like you to take from that. Lean startup is a term that was coined by Eric Ries, who was, in a way, forced to take Steve Lang's class in exchange for angel investing money. But it was something that profoundly changed the way he thinks. So Eric comes from he was an entrepreneur already, and he came from a technical background. So he was very well versed in agile programming, extreme programming, and he was greatly influenced by customer development ideas and principles. And he also was very influenced by lean, as in lean manufacturing, which is where the word lean comes from. And so he began to synthesize all these ideas, and his company at the time was IMView. That served as a test bed for a lot of these ideas. And by the way, we have someone from IMView speaking at the Lean Startup event here in Austin next week. So if you are interested after the talk, I can let you know when that is. It actually happens at Jai's office as well. But anyways, so going back to this, so lean startup, unfortunately, there are two words that get grossly misunderstood. The word lean, because a lot of people think it's being cheap, and the word startup, where they think that it's just applied to startup. So lean, as I said, comes from lean thinking or lean manufacturing, and it's not that off. The connection to it being cheap is not that far off, because a lot of what lean is about is fundamentally about eliminating waste, and money is just one of those resources. So it's about eliminating waste, being efficient with resources, and money is one of those resources that we want to be efficient with, but it's not necessarily the one that we optimize for. In a lean startup, we want to optimize for learning, and specifically learning from customers per unit time, and that's what being lean, or in the lean startup sense, is really about. So there's this idea of an iteration, and this is the basic takeaway from lean startup, is that you want to be able to iterate in small batches. You want to be able to iterate as many times as you can, learn from each one of those, and hopefully be able to fit in enough batches before you run out of resources, so that you can actually find something that starts to work. So again, if you have in a typical startup, we like to talk about runway. So if you've got a 6-month runway to go launch a product and build it and see if it works or not, rather than doing one big push, why not run 6, 7, 10, 20, 30 experiments along the way? And that's what the big idea from Lean Startup is that we don't necessarily need to build the full product to test it, and we'll talk about some techniques for how we do that without having the product in hand. So any questions so far? Okay. then bootstrapping, again, when people see bootstrapping, automatically they think in terms of funding. It means, someone who is kind of pulls himself in the bootstraps and is either self-funded, or the more accurate definition is funded through customer revenue, so customer financing. But the definition that I like to subscribe to is one that was coined by Bijoy Goswami, who's a founder of the Bootstrap Network here in Austin. Anyone know who he is? Few people. Okay. And he coined this term, right action, right time, which really stuck with me, because in a startup, we wake up with a priority list of 100. We want to get everything done. But at any given point in time, there are only a few key actions, only a few key metrics that matter. And what we need to do is focus just on those one or two things and really ignore the rest. And that's not only very liberating because it gives you a lot of focus, but it really eliminates waste. And so I saw a lot of similarities with bootstrapping and some of the tactics from lean startups. And I'll talk to you about some examples there. So even if you don't think in terms of right action, right time, it's very easy to get into the trap of running lots of tactics or lots of things that really don't get you anywhere. And I'll talk about some examples as we go along. So a little bit about myself. I have been running a company. I bootstrapped my first company 8 or 9 years ago. I sold that company last year. I'm not going to talk about the products directly. You'll see some of it kind of come through in the examples that I share. But I'll just say it was a file media sharing company. I was building some stuff around peer-to-peer and peer-to-web technologies. I sold that last year, but throughout that process, I've been fascinated with just how hard it is to build products. So one of the things that I learned is that startups can consume years of your life. I started that company with a spark of an idea that grew into this vision, which took just years to test and years to build. And I tried every methodology out there. At first, what a lot of first-time entrepreneurs do is I built my first product completely in stealth. Because I felt if I told another living soul, it would just be vaporized, be stolen, and I'd have competition right away. And on that, like Eric has a great test for that. So how many people believe that your idea is too valuable to tell another person? Well, this is a very mature crowd. But if you do and you're not admitting it, Eric Ries has a great, he basically has a great challenge for those people, and that is not to try to get your most valuable idea stolen, but take your second best idea and actually try to get someone to go implement it. Write to every product manager, write to every company you know that may implement this product that you want to see in the world, and see if they actually steal your idea. And it's actually quite hard. And that's one of the things that first-time entrepreneurs feel. Feel the idea is just that worthy of keeping to themselves, and that's usually a bad idea. So I built stuff in stealth. I've done, for those that are familiar from a software development perspective, I've done things like release early, release often. 37 Signals, for those who follow them, had coined this mantra, less is more. I built stuff with that. Minimal, less products. I've done more is more, built a lot of features and pushed those out. So I've done all kinds of things. And throughout that process, I did know that listening to customers was key, but I didn't quite know how. And that's when running into customer development felt like it was providing some real tactics that I could start using. And that's when I started blogging about a lot of these things, because I had more questions than answers. And I'll talk about that story more in detail a little bit later. But usually when I put this up there, a lot of people say, well, customers, they usually cite this code right here, the Henry Ford code. And that is that customers don't really know what they want, and they're actually bad at knowing what they want. And I think with this quote, there's something that a lot of people miss, and that is that customers are not really there to give you solutions. Here, what we're seeing are two things. People are asking for faster horses. Now, the problem that they really want solved is something that's faster than a horse. And that's what Henry Ford picked. Now, he dropped the horses part because that was really the solution. And so he solved the problem and came up with the solution, and that's what the entrepreneur's job is. And so this is one of my favorite Steve Jobs quotes, where it is not the customer's job to know what they want. And basically the way I interpret that is that it's the entrepreneur's job. What we are out to do is to look at the world with our lens and provide solutions to problems that other people have. And so when we talk about talking to the customer and asking the customer, It's not running a focus group. It's not getting a survey and asking the customers, give me a list of features that I then go build. But really what we want to do is probe into the deeper problems that they are encountering, being able to rank them, being able to kind of sift through what is true and what is not, and then come up with the right solution to that problem. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. How does that tie in with your iterations?
How does it tie with the iterations? So the way that we're actually going to uncover those things, each one of those is an iteration. So, and I'll kind of show you some of that. So some disclaimers I like to throw out there is that when you're in a startup, when you're building a startup, you're no longer in school. So you don't get points for following a process. There's no one grading you on how well you turned in, how well you actually run your company. So we are judged based on the results. And so I'm very much of a practice trumps theory type of person. And one of the things that particularly attracted me to Lean Startup is that it is a meta process, in that it doesn't really prescribe a lot of tactics. It really talks more at the principles level, much like lean thinking and lean manufacturing. And so it's really, deep down, it's really a process for continuous learning and continuous improvement. And so you can apply the same principles here to test the process itself, which is in a way what I've been doing. I've been applying a lot of these principles and turning them into tactics, and then testing those tactics in these iterative manner, in these iterative fashion, and then those that work, I do more of them, and those that don't, I kind of drop them off. And so to me, that's something to kind of take away from here, is that whatever I'm telling you is not necessarily going to solve the problems in your startup. You have to adopt it for your own particular situation. Again, with any methodology, there are no silver bullets. There are no guarantees for success. So when you were saying the whole thing of ensuring success, there are no guarantees for success. A good methodology can at best help you raise your odds for success, and that's what Lean Startup and customer development are really trying to do here. And the way we do it is basically letting you see what is risky first, and being able to tackle those things in a smaller, more manageable manner than having a big batch or a big failure that you have to then recover from. Okay, so what we're going to do today is kind of split this into two sections. I'm going to walk through some of these principles that I talked about, and then I'm going to show you. I'm basically, in the second half, I'm going to do a mini workshop, which doesn't have to be interactive. You can follow along if you want, but I'm just going to show you a real example of how you go through this process of thinking through and applying this running lean stuff. So let's get into the roadmap, or the three principles that you can use to distill down what's in running lean, or these. And if anyone has built, if anyone has a technical background, or even built have done problem solving type of classes, or seen some of those techniques, this will seem very familiar. In that, what we're really trying to do here is turn the startup into a product in itself. And so the first thing, before you can actually go test it, is you have to document your plan A. So you have to write that down. And then we identify the riskiest parts and tackle those first. And we do that through experiments. And I'll show you what an experiment would look like in a second. So let's just go down this, and I'll kind of probably become clearer with time. So documenting your plan A, the reason this is important is because of this, is that as entrepreneurs, we are especially gifted at building these reality distortion fields around ourselves. Reasonably smart people can rationalize anything, and we are especially gifted at that. So we can take any data that we are seeing and make it, we can explain it away with why it is doing what it is or it's not. So it's very important to write down these initial assumptions or hypotheses down. And traditionally, we have used a business plan for that exercise. So I usually ask this in all my talks and workshops. But how many people here have written a business plan before? So I'm not expecting a lot of hands to go, but there are a few. And keep your hands up if you enjoy that process. So no hands are up. So in some of the workshops, I do have one or two hands come up, and it's indicative of the fact that a business plan is a great exercise, but it's just for the entrepreneur. It's for them to basically do that brain dump of get the ideas that are in their head down on paper, and that's what it's really about. That's what the process is about. Unfortunately, it doesn't have the feedback loop that you would expect it to have, and that is investors don't read the whole thing. They ask for shorter and shorter versions of it, so eventually it becomes a slide deck, or it just becomes a 30-minute elevator pitch. And so that defeats the purpose of what the business plan was really about. It should be this portable document that you use to evolve with your ideas over time, since most Plan A's will not survive contact with the real world, with customers. It is going to evolve, and it's a great way for getting that feedback. So I'm going to show you an alternative model, which is the business model. And this is a one-page summary of what would go on a business plan. And so that looks something like this. And this is what we'll walk through in the second half of the class. So I'm not going to necessarily go through every one of these boxes. But this is the lean canvas format, which is an adaptation of the business model canvas, which was created by a researcher in Switzerland by the name of Alex Osterwalder. He did this as his PhD thesis, and he teaches this technique to big companies around the world. And I saw this, and at first it didn't quite resonate, but then something clicked one day, and I began just playing with it. And I changed a few of the boxes because I wanted it to be a little more actionable and more specific to what I was doing with lean startups. And so I changed some of these boxes, and that's what became the lean canvas. And all of this is released under Creative Commons, and so Alex Osterwalder and I have collaborated a little bit on this, and so he knows of what this is, and we've kind of worked together on it a little bit. But so we'll go into more detail of what these specific boxes are and how you fill them out. But the message here is that it's a one-page document, so it's very easy, it's very portable. Put it in front of someone, and it will get read because there are few words on it, and it forces you to be concise, which is actually more important than writing a 60-page business plan document, is getting to the point quickly. But the other thing you run into with business plans is that you have to fill in a lot of evidence, which at some point becomes a little bit like writing a fiction novel. So you have to go and research and pull these numbers and justify your forecasts and all of those kinds of things, which are very hard things to do in a startup, especially when you're looking that far out into the future. So so as I said, we'll get into the details of what the lean canvas is and how you fill one of those out. But the key takeaway here that I'd like you to have is this one here, that the product that you're building, the product you think you're building, is not really the product of your startup. So if you look at the canvas, I purposely made that solution box very small. It's less than 1/9 of the entire canvas. And that's because entrepreneurs are especially passionate about their solutions. If you hear a typical entrepreneur give a pitch, they spend a disproportionate amount of time, probably 2/3 or 3/4 of the time, talking about how great their solution is and solving a problem they spend only 2 or 3 minutes talking about it. And so what the canvas is really trying to do is expose you to the other 8 boxes that you need, that are actually the jigsaw puzzle you have to put together to build a successful startup. And so the product that you're really building is the entire business model and how it fits together. And the solution is really just one part of that. And as we'll also see, depending on, I know there's a mix of startups here in the room, but whenever I talk to web startups, what I found time and time again is that the solution box is usually not the riskiest box on that canvas. Everything that we are building nowadays can be built with the advent of the internet, open source, cloud computing. It's easy enough to build anything. So we're actually building more products than ever before. It's just the odds are still the same, and so we're building more stuff that nobody really wants. And so that's the point that I'm trying to drive home here, is that we really have to look at the entire business model, and there are far more riskier things. And as Steve Blank likes to say, what kills most startups, again, is not the technical risk, but the customer and market risk that those products face when they're launched. And so what we are trying to do is identify those and mitigate them sooner rather than later.
Can you give some examples of customer and product risks that you were thinking of?
Sure. So I'll say that one of the anti-examples would be finding a cure for cancer. So that's a scenario where we have extreme technical risk, but there is very little customer or market risk. If you had a cure for cancer, you don't have to go and ask anyone if they would like it. So that's the opposite scenario, but most startups don't fall into that camp. So most startups have a solution that they want to bring into the world, but the customer may not either know it's something they want or it's not something they want bad enough for the product to actually be right or for it to succeed. And so that's an example of a customer market risk. Okay, so another thing that I mentioned this lean canvas is this one-page document. As we'll see, it takes about 15 to 20 minutes to create one of these. One of the things that I do encourage people to do is spend a little bit of time up front brainstorming even multiple variations of their model. So this is another trap that I find people run into is they get this great idea while driving or in the shower, and then they immediately run into the implementation of it, and they pick a customer segment and say, I'm going to build this, and then off they go. And I think that because we have got the power of something like the canvas now, it's a lot faster to create some of these and actually see these models work on paper. When you first start out, you have an inkling of a problem, a solution, a customer segment, but as we'll even see in the example I run into, is that with just a few tweaks, you can change the entire business model. If you go after a slightly different customer segment, everything in that model changes, from your channels to your pricing, everything changes. And so being able to spend a little bit of time up front brainstorming those models and then prioritizing where to start is something that is time well spent. And this is usually an exercise that I encourage people to do with their mentors or their advisors. And that's a great way to get the feedback on what your idea really is. So I like to give the analogy of Jerry Maguire. So there's this line there where he says, help me help you. And I've been in that scenario many times where I've got great advisors on my team, but because they can't peer into my head, they don't really know what I'm trying to build or what I'm trying to think, and so it's whatever I tell them. And a lot of people practice what we call success theater. So we only report on the good news. We don't really talk about all the bad stuff, and sometimes we don't even know to talk about the bad stuff. And so this is a way of, and we'll see other examples, but this is a way, at least initially, of putting your ideas and what it is you're trying to do down on this one page and get feedback from people who either have more experience or have had other domain, have specific domain knowledge where they can help you avoid certain traps that you may not have had and you may not even know past. So that's what this is about. And then there is this 4-point kind of rating thing that I use, which is when I do create some of these models, and we'll see an example later, but I look at things like customer pain levels. If I've got two customer segments and I know that one really has a must-have pain, I'll obviously want to prioritize starting with that one first. The other thing would be ease of reach. It would be great for me to build a product for the government, but if I have no channels into them, that can take me months just to build that. So if I can start somewhere easier, I will prioritize that over starting in the harder place.
What the product or solution in this was achievability, right?
Yes, and so where I was going, I think that would be, it has to be on this list, but I'm kind of, the reason I don't highlight that as much is I feel the entrepreneur will already do that unconsciously. And so what I'm trying to do is really go outside their comfort zone. But there is the feasibility, and so you definitely, once we reach a point where, even once we go through the interviews and we understand the problem we need to build, there is this question we have to face: is what we are trying to build even feasible?
Have you seen that great video of the anti-gravity generator?
I have not.
You got to see it because it responds to this very point.
Okay.
I've given you the punchline, actually.
Okay. And then the third and fourth criteria that I kind of use here are more around the business model. So again, depending on which customer segment you're going to, as you'll see, you can charge different prices or probably different margins. So that's where we're looking at the economics of this model, at least even just on paper. This is really a napkin sketch to see, is this even a market, is this even a problem worth solving? So that's what this is about. Any questions? Okay. And so now that we have a short list of possible business models that we want to go target, we then start by identifying the riskiest parts of that plan. And so this slide is showing that next iteration where we go and say, these parts of the canvas are really what's risky about these models. And what's risky can vary by customer segments. As I mentioned, some customers might be harder to reach than others, so you may want to test those. In some situations, pricing may be a risk item. If I'm trying to sell anything into a consumer market, price might be something that's riskier. So the risk can vary, but a good way of understanding what those risks are is to understand these 3 stages of a startup that I'll talk about here in a second. So a typical startup goes through 3 stages. You have problem solution fit, product market fit, and then scale. So during the problem solution fit stage, what we're really trying to answer is, do I even have a problem worth solving? And so I mentioned how the startups consume years of your life, and it's very easy to get passionate about something you're building and kind of lose sight of that. Only to find that you don't either have a customer or you don't have a market at the end of that process. So what we try to prioritize above everything else is finding problems worth solving. And that's why like the technical feasibility, in my mind, comes in that kind of after that first step. So the way we do that is we decouple the problem from the solution, and actually even late bind the solution as late as possible. So we start with the problems that we think the customers have. We go through a series of customer interviews and not even talk about the solution, not even pitch the solution, but try to explore the problems that the customers are facing. And so a typical interview goes kind of along this route. Is I'll identify a particular customer segment. I'll have a list of problems that I think they will respond to as a must-have or a strong need versus a don't need or latent need. And so I'll go ahead and start the conversation, and I'll write out through a story. I'll talk about these 3 problems. Well, they don't have to be 3, but 1 to 3 problems. And I want to get some kind of resonance, some kind of verbal resonance that yes, we have this problem today. And while that is great, customers do inadvertently lie, sometimes intentionally because they're talking to someone, or sometimes just unconsciously because they're trying to be polite or nice. And so what we then try to do is probe a little bit deeper. So if they did say they have a must-have problem, we want to really understand how are they solving that problem today. And so if they say, I've got this must-have problem, but they're doing nothing about it, then there's a disconnect right there, and it's not really a must-have problem for them. But if they are, for example, building a homegrown system of their own and really struggling because it's not doing quite what they want, or they're using a competitor's product, or they're using something that you didn't even know existed, all of those are ways to kind of get to, do they have a problem worth solving? Do they have an adequate solution for it? And if not, that's what arms you with the positioning you need to come back with, the pricing that you need to use to anchor your solution against. So that would be the problem interview, where we go and we try to identify those 3 things. Who are the customers that have this problem? Is the problem painful enough? And then how are they solving it today? And so with those answers, we then go and formulate a solution, what in the lean startup world we call a minimum viable product. So that would be the minimum feature set we would need to put out in front of the customer to solve those problems, and maybe just to solve the number 1 problem. And so it's not even necessarily a complete product full of all the features that your competitors have, but it's just enough that in some ways highlights your unique advantage, highlights your unique value proposition. And so we define what this MVP is, but then we don't again rush into building it. What we do is we build some sort of a demo, kind of loosely used, of what that solution would be. Now, if you can actually build a working prototype, by all means, go do it. But if you can instead build a screenshot or some kind of a physical prototype or anything that can be used to help the customer visualize the solution, that's what we want to do in that phase. So we want to go back to those customers and say to them, these 3 problems you had, we're gonna solve it this way. Is that going to address the problem? So you're looking for that validation at that stage as well. And that's also a good time to test pricing as well. And I'll talk a little bit about pricing a little bit later. But once we have that, we have this problem solution fit. So once you've got a product that the customer says, if you build this, they will buy it at this price, you have a problem solution fit. And if you do your back of the envelope calculations, you can see, is this something worth pursuing or not? And then we go into that next stage, which is product market fit. So now you go out and you build this MVP, minimum viable product, you launch it to the customers, and what we want to measure here is, have we actually built something they want? So there's a huge disconnect with an interview and getting requirements and us actually implementing it in a way that solves the problem. So that's what we're trying to do here, and it's usually not going to work right off the bat. There's a whole set of iterations. We probably need more features. When we first build the product, it doesn't quite work that well, and so there's a lot of room for improvement. And so we go through a lot of cycles here. And again, the key is trying to make them as small as possible and maximize the learning in that process. But once we have reached product market fit, some level of success is guaranteed because you have demonstrated that you have a product. If you're charging for it, customers are paying for it, there's demand for it, you know how to reach more customers, at least you're working on those channels. At this point, you're now looking to accelerate growth. And that's the final stage of the scale stage. And so looking at this slightly differently, product market fit is a very important milestone for a startup because it changes the tactics and the strategies we use. And so it's good to look at this picture just down the middle. So before product market fit, our focus is really on learning. We're trying to learn about customers. And the kind of experiments we run are pivots, and I'll explain that in a second. After product market fit, our focus shifts more towards growth. And so you could say that before product market fit, what we're trying to do is find a plan that works or starts to work. And after product market fit, we are looking to accelerate that plan. So that's usually the ideal time to raise your big round of funding because you've got something that's working, you want to add rocket fuel and make it go really fast. So let me talk a little bit about pivots and optimizations. So has anyone here played with the key locator device thing that it's got a little emitter and you can find lost keys? So my wife always loses her keys, and so one Christmas I bought her one of those things. You attach the keys, and you've got a receiver which beeps when it locates the keys. And that worked for a while until she lost the locator. but the way those work is that if you've got a key somewhere in the room, the way that you start looking for it is you pivot right around in a circle. So you go all the way around the room. So you're taking a very broad sweep. And that's very much what a pivot is like, is you're taking these broad sweeps and looking for a signal, any signal somewhere in the room. And as you start walking towards it, you start making fewer and fewer corrections because the signal starts getting louder, and you start making very minor changes, and that's what an optimization would look like. And as you approach the device, it beeps really loud and you're there, and that's what product market fit would look like. So that's a good way to explain what we do initially, and that's why even doing those broad sweeps with the business model are actually encouraged. We want to test big, bold ideas. Because one thing that we will see, and I'll talk about this a little bit too, is that when you first start out, we don't have the luxury of having a lot of customers, and so we don't have quantitative data to back what we're learning. And so a lot of people say, well, if you're interviewing, and I'm building a web startup, this stuff will never work for me because I'm trying to reach millions of users. I can't talk to just 10 people. That's not statistically significant. Well, if 10 out of 10 people say they don't want what you're building, that's pretty significant. And that's what we're doing early on, is we're doing these very broad sweeps. We're trying to figure out, is there even a weak signal here? And that gives us permission to move on. And we verify that with quantitative data over time. Okay, so now we'll talk a little bit about experiments. So I've been using a lot of these terms, experiment, to define what that is. So for those of you that are familiar with the lean startup process, you recognize this feedback loop. And so this is the learning feedback loop that fuels a lean startup. So it starts with ideas on top, and we then go and build something. And here it shows code, but it doesn't necessarily have to be code. It could be a screenshot, it could be a demo, it could be a physical product. This was a slide that Eric created very early on, so he was still thinking in terms of just software. Once we have built that thing, we then measure. We put it in front of customers, and we measure either qualitatively or quantitatively. We gather some data, and then from that we derive some learning, which then feeds that feedback loop. And so I mentioned early on how startups have to go around this loop as quickly as possible because we're trying to find a plan that works before running out of resources. Time is our most valuable asset, not just in the startup, in life in general, but so the cycle time through this loop is very important. So speed and making the loop as small as possible and going around as quickly as possible is important. The other thing at the end of it is we have to be learning. We have to specifically be learning about customers. That's the only learning we care about. So we can go and learn about the technical feasibility, and we can go and learn about quality and try to make our products better. But starting with the premise that most products most products fail because of lack of customers and markets. Those are the ones we want to prioritize in this loop. So we're always looking to get customer validation, customer learning, and as a result, in so doing, we test these other things as well, at technical risk.
Eric Reese put this up once, and I got curious about what he meant by
Okay.
maybe you can talk about how fast is fast.
How fast is fast? Sure. So it would be one cycle through this loop. And so just giving an example, if I wanted to test an idea, so talking about the problem interview, a traditional approach might be, I get this idea, I'm going to go build a prototype. That might take me a week. It might take me 2 weeks. And one of the problems that I've seen people run into with the release early, release often philosophy, even though it seems like the right thing, they want to release early, is that as creatives, as entrepreneurs, we tend to take our work too seriously. We don't want to put a half-assed product in front of people, and so we actually end up spending way too much time building that first version. And that would be an example of taking a very long time in this loop. And so if instead we can just build a screenshot or build something that's smaller, put that in front of customers and get the same level of feedback, that would be a faster feedback loop. And Eric specifically talks about one of his products where they spent 6 months writing, and he personally wrote 60,000 lines of code for some IM client. And once they launched that site, they didn't even get past the landing page. People were not even signing up for the product. And so his big epiphany at the time was we could just put that landing page 6 months ago and learn the same thing. So that would be a case where you can actually learn, you can learn those things much faster, and that's a new way of thinking.
Well, one of the numbers he gave me that was shocking was software release frequency. And the end, I'm used to struggling to get software out of 6-month increments. His answer was 56 times a day.
Right. Well, yes. So there is this tactic called continuous deployment, and the idea of that is, again, much like the one-piece flow continuous manufacturing, where we take a feature and we look at it much like we would look at anything on the assembly line. And so to be somewhat like truthful about what that 50 to 60 times means is that it doesn't necessarily mean they're complete features that they're building. They're not necessarily going through the loop 50 times a day because there's still the customer validation we have to get. But we are pushing code changes 50 to 60 times a day. And the way we do it is we do them in very small batches. And so, again, typically a software, the way it's released is we have a release plan, we gather all these features, and we have it go through QA and we go through all of these things. What we're trying to do in the continuous deployment model is release much smaller batches of things directly into the live customer environment. And so when you're releasing just 10 or 20 lines of code, if something horribly goes wrong, you know what caused it, versus having hundreds or thousands of lines of code, and you can roll back immediately. And so that's one of the fake safety nets that we have, is we're doing those kinds of things. And so it's really a continuous train of updates versus doing these big batch releases, which is what it is. But I wouldn't say it's a full cycle through the loop because we still have to gather the data and learn at the end of it.
What I'm hearing here too is, correct me if I'm wrong, this is really about failing fast. Like you've talked a bunch about looking for what's not working so that you can go focus on what is working.
Sure.
I mean, your pivot is about, it's not about where the dot is, it's where it's not, and eliminate looking over there, right?
Right. And typically that's what startups, that's what startups go through, is there's a lot of course correction along the way. So there is this, starting with this notion that the plan A is not going to work, but we're still going to be bold about it and test it, is what this is about. Now, if you just hit it out the park and that is the right thing, I guarantee there'll be other things that will go right. So there's always things that don't quite go per plan, and that's what this is really about. Yeah.
Also, had a question. A lot of the language is used in the startup about iterating fast. The concern that I have is somebody that approaches that on the first impression might think that they're iterating for the sake of iterating rather than iterating for the sake of learning or filtering.
No, absolutely, and I'll show you a slide which will actually talk exactly about that. It's coming up.
I'm a little confused. If you do it a little too fast, aren't you worried sometimes that the sample data you have isn't large enough, that it might not be representative of what's grading coverage?
Sure, and so there is this two-phase validation that I talked a little bit about. So the first thing we want to do is get some level of customer feedback, even if it's qualitative. And so even maybe getting into details, like if I were even to build a feature, one of the very, very first things that I do is set up a call with the customer and try to get down to the problem that this feature is really addressing. Make sure we understand that. Because many times what the customer again asks is not maybe what they want solved. And if we just build that, it's not going to do anything. So So we start with that, and then we go through mockups, we go through things to make sure we're building the right feature. Then we push it out, and we even do it. So that's also, we use a technique of partial rollout. So we push it just to a subset of our users, and the ones that actually requested this feature, make sure we get positive validation that this does solve the problem, and then before we roll it out to everyone else. And then that's when we start collecting quantitative data to verify that the feature was actually good. And if you go through the process, there are a few instances where you get to the end where you have to pull a feature out, but that is the consequence there, is that even a feature that we build, if it's not getting used, it's a form of waste. It's something that you're going to have to maintain documentation about, you're going to have to build tests around it. So if it's a feature that you put out there and after a while it's not getting used, the right thing to do is to kill that feature, is to actually take it back out. Any other questions?
Yeah. Can you give me some examples of like qualitative data that you get from your customers, like that you can learn from? You know what I'm saying? Like what? You know, I understand this half. You know, the idea is build code,
Right.
measures and data. I don't really understand so much.
Sure, and so it is very qualitative, and it is, so it's in those interviews, what the skill we're actually practicing is one of being a good interviewer. So we're not really pitching, and so if you're doing a lot of the talking, you're doing it wrong. So to give you an example of how, maybe just give you one of the examples that I ran into, is that I had a product which I'm going to use as an example later, and I had 3 problems that I had in mind. And so I was talking to wedding photographers, and so I asked them, do these problems resonate with you? And I got kind of a lukewarm feeling, that yeah, these are things that are difficult. And so I asked them to walk me through their workflow. And people love to talk about their work. And he spent 45 minutes outlining the steps in excruciating detail from when he came back from a wedding to all the things he did to get it to the final form. And along that way, I actually uncovered another area, which was problem number 4 that I never talked about. And so I said, well, is that thing, it seems like you're doing a lot of work for that, is that painful? And it was hugely painful. And he said, yes, that's the one thing that he spends his workflow was disproportionately weighted around that one problem. And so that was one of those discovery moments where we uncovered a problem that we were going to build. It was a feature list that we had, but it completely changed after we had these conversations. In the next interviews, we started with that as being the number 1 problem, and the conversations actually all went very differently because it immediately got down to the same type of reaction. So, so qualitative learning is tricky, and that's where that is one of the Achilles heel of all of this, is that there are a number of them. One is that as technical folks, we tend to not want to get out of the building, and it's hard to go and ask and be very open-ended about what it is we want to do. But the good news is that there is a whole lot of learning. I learned, even from that example, I learned something that easily would have saved me months of discovery through building and finding out that this backup thing, which is what I found out was what they needed, was more important than some of the things I was thinking of building. So that's an example of qualitative type of learning.
So when you're saying measure, it's more measure personally.
Well, on the qualitative sense, yes. Now, when we do quantitative, we're actually measuring what customers are doing. So before we have built anything, we have to rely on what they say. And sometimes they lie, and so there are some techniques for trying to get down, and that's where like asking the open-ended question is a way of drilling into more details, and maybe they contradict themselves, maybe they don't. But we kind of measure what they say. After we build something, we measure what they do. And so that's where analytics come into play, and in the software world, we've got all kinds of things that can measure anything and everything customers are doing with their site. So one of the things that doesn't get nearly enough attention is focus, and that's where I was going with the right action, right time. And I'll talk a little bit about that next. So we talked about just iterating for speed. So that's not enough. We have to maximize for speed, learning, and focus. And so this helps to kind of show what happens when you don't have all 3. So assuming we just have speed and focus. So this is where we're going very fast, and we're focused on just one thing, but we're not learning anything in exchange. The image of a dog chasing its tail comes to mind. So you're running around in circles just really, really fast. If you don't have speed and you're learning a lot and you're super focused on stuff, so that's good, but you aren't going fast enough, that's where you'll either run out of resources before finding a plan that works, or you will get competition that will just take advantage of your early learning and then just outpace you. And then then finally, if you're not focused at all, when you are going very fast and you're learning a lot of stuff, that's where we get into this other trap of premature optimization. So if you're in the software world, we might start worrying about, well, what happens if we get 1 million users on day one? So we start building all this infrastructure. Or if you're wearing a marketing hat, you might start worrying about user acquisition too early. So you start doing SEO and you start doing optimization of your channels. But if you don't quite have a product that people want, all those people, you can drive 1,000 people to it, but they will still leave at just as fast a rate as if you had driven 10 people to it. So that's, again, an example of where you have to have all three things to build this optimal learning loop. So you have to be focused on the right things. And the tactics alone aren't going to get you the results you want. Yep.
For the focus part, how focus is focus? Like, when you say focus, do you mean like a vision of something that doesn't change, or is focus like what you're doing right now?
Yeah, so there are a number of examples, and that's why when Bijoy mentioned right action, right time to me, it had a very philosophical meaning to me. But when I did a lot of lean startup things, they became very practical. So in lean startups, we have, and I know Joshua Bear is going to talk about startup metrics probably next week, but we talk about metrics, and there are just these 5 key metrics, and I'll introduce you to what those look like. And so an example of focus is just identifying which one of those metrics matter right now, and just doing everything you do is just about that one metric. And that helps to define which customer requests we take, which customers we go after, all of those kinds of things. Like even so, an example of that premature optimization is that if I don't quite have a product that is working yet, trying to worry about user acquisition in a formal way. So you wouldn't want to even think about that. And I'll show you some more examples in a little bit. So everything I've been talking about sounds very scientific, and that's because a lot of this does have a basis in scientific method and scientific thinking. So here's another one of those. It's this notion of falsifiable hypotheses. And so falsifiable hypothesis, for those that may not be familiar, is a statement that has to be able to be proven wrong. And we have to start writing hypotheses that way, because otherwise we fall into the trap of gathering just enough data to convince ourselves that we were right. And it's much easier to explain with an example, and so I'll show you an example here. So I might have a hypothesis that because I'm an expert in a certain field, I'll be able to drive early adopters. The problem with that is that it's too vague. So if I go out and I give a talk, or I do a blog post, or I tweet something on Twitter, and I get 2 signups, does that prove that hypothesis? What if I got 100 or 1,000? There's no way for me to basically determine when it was proven or not. And so I'll do the typical thing, which is I'll put my optimistic hat and say that's done, check that off, and go off to the next one. And people fall into that trap. So a much better way of framing that same thing is to use a formula of using a specific action that will drive an expected result or expected outcome. And so what I'm going to instead say is I'm going to go and write a blog post tomorrow, and as a direct result of that, which I can measure, I'm going to get 100 signups. And even if I don't get that, it's a form of a reality check. It brings pause to the team. It lets us sit down together and really assess whether the plan that we have in mind is actually working or not. So that's a way of making these bold predictions, much like we would with an experiment, and then measuring whether it was actually proven true or false. But it has to be, so the key point is that it has to be proven false. Otherwise, we'll always come out thinking that we're making progress, and that's a trap we can fall into. Does that make sense? And then a few other slides here, and then we will get into more questions afterwards. But another thing that's very important that we stress a lot in the lean startup is having metrics, having analytics, but more importantly, having accessible dashboards. So a business needs to be very open. So I mentioned that Jerry Maguire thing early on, is that if you don't quite show your team, which is both your internal team, your advisors, your investors, all the way to your investors, what's happening in the business, it's very hard for them to really help you. And so that's something that it's hard to do, because a lot of people have a lot of personal attachment to their products and don't want to be proven wrong, and I understand that. And it's one of those things that it's more easily said than done, but it's something that hopefully with time, it's something that people begin to feel the importance of doing. So I just wanted to sort of put that out there. So that's another thing that I talk about with lean. Is the reason I asked early on is how many people have been in a startup before, is I find that a lot of these ideas resonate with people who have at least built one product before and seen what the process looks like. And partly because lean is about eliminating waste. And I find that you can't really appreciate waste unless you're wasteful yourself. So this would apply with anything, even if you were trying to invest money in the stock market. I remember in my earlier days, I thought I could beat the market, and the first few times I actually did with those picks, but then I very quickly found that that wasn't the case. So it's just one of those things, again, is that there's this process of making these predictions, making these judgments, and over time our judgments get better. But we have to put ourselves out there and share all of our data with our teams. And so the actual numbers here don't quite matter. This is an example of one of the dashboards that I had. But it's using, this is all the tactical stuff we were getting from the interviews we were running. We were keeping track of who we spoke to, what results we had, and we were sharing these with anyone who wanted to see them on the team. That's a lot of stuff to really digest by people that might be advisors or investors. And so I then also use this other format, which is a way of communicating progress at iteration steps. So whether these are 2-week or 1-month intervals, being able to say, this is what we learned from our last iteration. So this is what we thought was true. So we have a list of things that we believed were true that would happen. This is what our customers told us, or what we found out that was either validated or invalidated or hypotheses. And then these are the next things that we're going to do after this. So this is a very concise way of talking about progress and what we are doing, what we're learning along the way. Now, all of this is good, but unless you've got the reality check of numbers, it's again very hard to say, are you really making progress? Because you can be learning and still not making any measurable improvements. So that's where knowing what your key metric is and plotting that over time is a way of seeing whether the graph is just staying flat, which is what happens for the longest period in the startup, or God forbid it actually starts going down, and you want it to have a slow uptick. And at some points you make some breakthroughs where there are bigger upticks. So that's a way of summarizing your learning at that more granular level. And I already talked about this early on, so I'm not going to speak a lot about it, but this was the whole qualitative versus quantitative, is that you have to start qualitative first because we don't quite have enough users and customers to collect statistically significant data from. And that gives us permission to then move forward and then verify that through data over time. And then finally, so what I was trying to do here was talk about the roadmap of what a lean startup process, what a running lean process would look like. So this would complete that picture. So we started with a set of these canvases. We immediately ruled out some that were just wrong. Then we came up with a short list of 3, and we started running experiments on them. And these could be just interviews. They don't have to be building, but if you can, I've been in situations where I have the same product that can be marketed in many different ways. And so I've got landing pages that target the same product. So you can even go ahead. It's not just at the interview stage. You can run in parallel for a little while and you're going to test multiple segments. And then at some point, you begin to narrow down on what is a single model. So in a startup, you have to get focused on that one model at some point. And start testing those and eventually get to a point of what we call product market fit. And that's the first milestone. So any questions?
So what did you call the first milestone, the last one?
Product market fit.
Oh, product market fit.
Yes. And so what I'm going to do now is share an example with you. And this is not a hardware example or a software example. It's one that hopefully a lot of people should understand. It's the process of writing a book. So some of you may or may not know, but I've written a book called Running Lean on all of this stuff. And so I'll talk about how I wrote it because it followed this same process that I outlined. So it serves as a good example. So here's the time scale. So right at the beginning, I was writing a blog. And I mentioned early on that I started this blog because I was running into all these different ideas and theories about how to build better products. And I ran into customer development, and it resonated at a academic or at a theoretical level, and I wanted to test them. And as I started to do it, I found out there were many unanswered questions. A lot of what Eric was doing was retroactively describing what was happening at his company, which at that time had 40, 50 employees. This is IMD making $40, $50 million. So they were able to do a lot. They were a lean startup machine. They were doing 50 deployments a day, automated testing, doing all of these things, which I could not do. And so I began to distill this down to things that I could do, and that's what I began writing about. And along the way, I had a number of readers who said, well, you should take this writing and turn it into a book. And at first, while I was flattered by it, I kind of laughed it off and said, I have no interest writing a book because I'm too busy running a startup. Writing a book is something you do, when you go into the mountains and you go away for 6 months at a time. And I had no interest in doing that. But after about the 12th request, I said, there probably is something here. Maybe I should take a call and I should actually probe a little bit deeper. So that was that first stage where we try to understand the problem. And so I talked to these readers of mine, and I asked them why they wanted me to write this book. Because Eric had a lot of content online, Steve Blank had a book already. There was my blog, there were many blogs, many videos online. So why would we need another book? And so they told me what I just stated, that what I was writing about was a very tactical how-to guide for how to take this stuff to practice, and they felt that had some value. And so that at least gave me an understanding of what that unique differentiation or value might be. And so I said, okay, that's interesting, but how do I test this? And so I built this teaser page, which looked something like this at the time. So I didn't go and pick a book cover. I didn't go and I just picked a title, which was actually a different title than the one that I ended up with. But what I really wanted to test was the table of contents. So I called those users up and I asked them, if I wrote this book, would you buy it? And I said, it was a business book, so it would be $20, $30. Would you buy this? And I showed them the table of contents and got lots of feedback. And that was hugely valuable because the table of contents, we just basically refined the table of contents on those conversations. And we got to a point where 12 people said, yes, if you write this book, I will buy it. I said, okay, I'm going to write it by summer. So I put coming this summer, and I hung up the phone with them. And I said, 12 people is great, but that's not the problem worth solving. I mean, that would only pay for a few hours of my time writing this book. So I left this teaser page up. I promoted it through some of my channels on my blog and on my Twitter, just announced I was writing a book. Other people helped kind of carry that message. And I did nothing about the book. I went off to running my startup. So that's where I was looking for a problem worth solving before I even did anything about it. Summer came and I hadn't reached a critical point. Kind of halfway through summer, I reached a point where I had 1,000 people sign up to the email list that said, if you write this book for this price, I'm interested, I'll buy it. So that's when I first took it seriously and said, okay, maybe I should seriously consider writing a book. So I began thinking of what that MVP would be. I thought I'd write the first chapter. And as with any project, we always underestimate how hard it is. So I thought it was really, I had a blog, so it would be cutting and pasting a few things and I'd have that first chapter. And it wasn't quite that easy. And so I said, this is just too hard. So what I did instead was announce a free workshop. So I took that table of contents, I turned it into a slide deck, and I announced a free workshop here in Austin. And 30 people said they would come because it was free, and why not? And that's a good principle, is that if you can't give away your product for free, you sure hell can't charge for it. So I had 30 people said they would come, but I had room for only 10. Plus, I wanted to run more experiments with the other 20. So I took 10 of them, and I hand-selected 10 of them, so they were a good mix. And Jason Cohen, if some of you know him, was one of that early guinea pigs. So he sat in that workshop, and the workshop was very well received. And it was the same content here, but it was a very horrible format. It was just death by PowerPoint type of slides. But again, they liked the content. We got a lot of feedback. Again, refined that content. And then after I did the first one, I decided to do another one, but this time I would charge for it. So I wanted to see if this content was really valuable. What can I pay? What can I get people to pay for? So I started doing these paid workshops. I tested pricing and it doubled the pricing many times since then. Ran the workshops for several months. Got invited to go talk to a number of places, do these workshops there. And it was all great feedback. It was all a way for me to get the content I needed to write this book. And so once I reached, this is about September now, where I knew I could write that first chapter. And I wrote the first chapter, and actually AppSumo, we got someone representing AppSumo, helped promote that first chapter of the book. And so that's what happened over there. But at this point, I was starting to get emails from the people who had expressed interest. They were on that email list and saying, when is this book coming out? Summer is come and gone. We don't see any book. And I went back to them and I said, well, what I can do is I've decided to write this book as much like I would build software. So I would write it in a very iterative manner, and I would do these two-week releases of the book. And so I went back to the landing page and kind of tweaked it a little bit, where people pre-ordered the book. They got a slight discount, but they were agreeing to get 2 2 chapters every 2 weeks. And that's how I wrote the book. So again, rather than going away into the mountains for 3 months, even to like write this book, because I knew what I wanted to write, but it was still going to take time. I did 2 chapters at a time, and that was hugely valuable because it helped me get lots of feedback on content, on flow of the book, as well as getting a lot of errors fixed along the way. So that was a way of getting that feedback loop put in place with these early adopter customers. And an interesting point there is that when I did announce that, there were a number of them who said, well, I don't like the PDF, I'm going to wait for the full book because I want it to be on the iPad, I want it to be on the Kindle. And that's an example of a customer. They were customers, but they didn't eventually buy the book, but they were not necessarily your early adopter customers. And that's something we stress a lot early on, is that you want to go and identify who your early adopters are. And many times these people are as visionary as you are, only from the problem perspective. So these people wanted this content no matter what form, whether they were in bits and pieces or they were written on paper, it didn't quite matter. That's really the identification.
Wait, so why are they so important? Are they important primarily because they'll pay for it and therefore you can continue to fund the iterations, or?
Well, so that's one form of validation. But I would say they're important because they start that learning process. They are motivated enough to use your product and give you real feedback, which is something that you don't always get with people that aren't quite early adopters.
So they'll engage with you.
They'll engage with you. And so it's a way of building that feedback loop. And so as I mentioned, I would write these chapters and get like whole paragraphs worth of stuff that were just bad or could be written better. And that I not like, and had this been just a regular book that had just gone out, I wouldn't have gotten that level of feedback necessarily.
I guess I've seen instances where I call that the core, right? Early adopters the core, and they're not necessarily representative of the mass market, and so you can build the wrong product for the core. But I hear what you're saying about at least you're getting feedback and moving.
Right, and so that's the problem that Jeffrey Moore greatly described in his book, the chasm, which is you can go after the early adopters, but to make that jump, there is a chasm. You do have to do some things radically different. But the things that, and so that's something we talk about, and I've heard someone say they asked Jeffrey Moore one time, how do you solve that? And he said, well, I don't know, I just identify it. But in the lean startup world, what we talk about a lot is that we should be so lucky we actually get to the chasm, right? Because there's so many obstacles just getting there. And so even starting with those early adopters and getting to that point is progress. And if you can get there, then you can figure a way to make it.
Isn't that just like a beta?
Yes and no. And so when you say beta, what do you mean by beta?
Like you're letting people use unfinished products with the goal of getting feedback.
Sure. And so I would say it's slightly, as I said, depending on what you mean by beta. So I kind of look at this as a more qualified group of people. So when you do a beta, typically you put it out there, and depending on what the friction is to use the product, you can get all kinds of people and all kinds of feedback. And what this is really qualifying. These are really early adopters who were blog readers who liked the content, who wanted to see this book written. So it's a slightly more qualification than just putting it out in the open and getting anyone to critique it. So anyways, I went through these 2-week release cycles, and then something kind of unexpected happened along the way. Is that as I was writing it, halfway through it, I got publisher interest. So there were 3 publishers that contacted me, and my first question to them is, why would you want to publish this book? Because I've, in a way, been self-publishing it and been floating copies all over the place and leaked it a few times, and this is like Hacker News, and so, why would you want this published? And so what they told me is that, much like an investor would think, is that what I was doing was validating this market for them. And the fact that I'd gone and pre-sold 1,000 copies of my book showed them that there was a potential market here, and they could come with their marketing engine and make this be more successful. And so it was a very different conversation. Had I started that conversation here trying to find a publisher, not only would it have been hugely distracting, but I would have gone through many manuscripts, and I'd probably have to write the whole book and go through a lot of defending of whether this book has any merit or not. And when it was there, that was really a very different type of conversation. It was a much shorter conversation.
This story confirms what you said earlier about stealth. If you had tried to do this in stealth, those people would never have found you.
Yes.
I think it's also worth pointing out that you can replace publisher with like investor and think about your business in the same way. And that typically happens.
Yep. And so this is what the final book looks like. So since that writing, I just crossed the 10,000 sold mark. few weeks back. But it is still it's still very much a self-published book, but I have signed an agreement, signed a contract with a publisher, and so they'll be publishing it later this year. But that's what the finished product looks like. So I did go back and get a designer to do the book cover. The title remained the same, but I played around with subtitles, did some testing around there, built a real marketing website, and all these testimonials came from those early adopters. So David Scott, who's at Matrix Partners, one day I seen his email go by, and he was one of the persons who had bought the first 2 chapters of that book and had been reading it along. So it's just one of those things where, again, finding the early adopters is great because not only if you build the right product, you get that feedback, but you also can use them as testimonials when you are ready to build a marketing website. So that's what I did after the fact. And so now that the book is finished, it doesn't really feel like it is. I kind of put a question mark there because I've opened this in a very iterative manner, and it felt like, much like you do with large software projects, is you never quite finish them, you just release them at certain points. And so also like Lean Startup and a lot of the stuff that I'm doing is continually evolving. And that was why the book was so hard to write, because a lot of the ideas were changing as I was writing it. So I released it at some point, but I continue to blog. And so that's where the conversation continues. I've done things like newsletters after that. The workshops, which I thought was really just a way to test the MVP, have actually become a product of their own. So I now that the book is out, I get lots of requests to go and do these kinds of workshops all across the world. So I've been traveling to different places, doing those kinds of things, which was an unexpected side effect.
I can't believe what you charged us to be here tonight.
and then the other thing that's kind of come out of this, and so I usually talk to people about how do you really find problems worth solving. And my answer to that is that if you surround yourself with passionate people, no matter what vertical it is, problems emerge. Everyone has problems. All customers have problems. The customers everywhere, and they all have problems. And if you wear your entrepreneurial hat, you're able to internalize those problems and look and find solutions that you think will solve them, and then that's a way to uncover those rather than going at it in a very solution-focused way, which I've done also in the past. And so in that process of working with a lot of startups and talking to a lot of startups, a handful of products that were homegrown products that I had built for myself kind of emerged as being things that I could test as products, and that's what I'm doing now as well. Because deep down, people ask me if I'm pivoting to becoming a consultant or a speaker, and I tell them that no, I love building products too much that that's what I really want to keep doing. And all of these are just things that seem to help along the way. So that's kind of the story of kind of running Lean applied to a non-software hardware book, which hopefully helps illustrate a lot of the principles that I've been talking about the last 45 minutes. Yeah, so if you are interested in getting the book, you can go to Running Lean HQ. I've actually created a discount code for everyone here, so you can just print that code and download the PDF. So if you are interested.
Thank you.
And then for the second half, I think what I'll do is just pause for a little bit so people have questions. And then what I was going to do is run through an actual example of going through the thought process of building one of these canvases. Because there are many questions about what goes in there and how you test, how you measure these things. So I'll walk through an example, and that should take 30 to 40 minutes to kind of get through one whole example. But if there are any questions, we can stop now and address those. I can do that. We can do it offline. Would you like me to do it now? So I would say that one of the products is actually this one, is Lean Canvas. And just to set that up, so Lean Canvas was what I showed early on, and it started out as really a toy project that I had, and I run into Osterwalder's work, and I began to use it for my own needs, and I thought it would be a nice tool to have online. And so I commissioned a few other entrepreneurs to help me build this as an MVP within 2 weeks. And I started using them in my workshops, and through that learning process, saw that it was really something compelling there in the way entrepreneurs were talking about their products that they've never done before. And so while this was a side project, it's become more of my focus, and I have bundled it with the books. In the book I talk about using a canvas, and it's one of the products that come out of it. The other product I'm building is more around managing your customer life cycle and more in the context of SaaS businesses, software service businesses. So if you look at a typical analytics product, they're great at converting, they're great at measuring conversions from visitors to signups. But once you have a signed up user, there's this long life cycle of usage that it's kind of hard to manage. And so we have built some things that a lot of them built on some of these startup principles, which have influenced that which is the other product. So in many ways, it's looking at problems that we have solved for ourselves as homegrown systems, and found other startups struggling with the same things, and trying to make them services that they can just use, and kind of outsource it to somebody else. Okay, so there is so this tool is online. If people have computers on right now, they can go to ecanvas.com. There is a sign-up code, and with the book you get it as well. So if you want to play around with it, you can. But I'm just going to quickly walk through an example here. So, any questions before I? Any other questions?
Will you go back to that other slide real quick, just for 1 second? Wait, 20. Thank you.
No, the company is called User Sample, but I'm actually changing the name again. So it's going to be called Spark 59. It's just going to be a generic company. And there's a meaning behind the 59, but that's going to be just like a holding company. And I want to build multiple products.
Are you smithing one essentially, I like to use tech letter to make it look better. Well, I mean, I want to go around about web stuff. Certain tools easily made. Your application is so much more relevant, just more accurate. Hey, Austin. Stop me.
No, I didn't get to go. I feel like I played 2 hours ago. I don't know how that's possible,
You want to plug in? Yeah. Play the code. That's right.
Okay, so we'll kind of kick back up again, and so if you do want to follow along with your startup, I'm going to give. There's going to be enough time for you to fill out your canvas while I'm doing this.
Can I say something first too? I'm glad for. I'm sorry that we lost some people, but this is like really good. Like every one of the companies we work with wants to do this. All of you should be doing this. You should be like making one of these for your startup. If you're not doing it right now with a laptop in front of you, you need to be looking at this and going, okay, I'm going to come back tonight and then I'm going to go build one of these because it's really going to help you crystallize what it is you're working on and what you need to focus on now.
So we're going to use this example from one of my products that I built. So it was called Cloudfire, and it was a file media sharing product. And so a little bit of background around Cloudfire is that prior to building Cloudfire, I had just finished building a file sharing product called BoxCloud, and it was the basic. And our tagline there was dead simple file sharing. So this was pre-Dropbox. It was very Dropbox-like, but slightly different take on how we solved it. So it had some peer-to-peer, peer-to-web for those that know what that is. But the thing was that we had been selling those to businesses, and I had reached this point where I wanted to explore a consumer product, and I thought it would be fun to at least kind of take that same technology and repurpose it for something else. So that's kind of the background of this. And so when looking at your product, when we first start out, we have an inkling of problem, solution, customer, and that's what we really want to brainstorm, and we want to really flesh that out. And the first thing we want to do is look at the customers. We want to distinguish between customers and users, and that's easy. Customers pay you, users don't. And so and those could be different. So you might have a product where there are different types of users. So there's one that pays, and the others are just viewers or they use the product. But you may also have a situation where you have an advertising model where on Google search, for example, your users are the ones who are actually doing the search. The customers are really the advertisers. And so being able to clearly identify where you're getting that revenue from is what this is about. We want to distinguish between those two. Secondly, we want to split those broad customers into smaller ones. So I mentioned how early on, we're not worried about the mainstream customer, because we're not even worried about the chasm, we're just trying to even get there. And the way we need to do that is by going really narrow. We want to identify who is the customer segment that we can reach, because that focuses our marketing and focuses our target much more clearly. So we want to narrow those customer segments. And then we're going to sketch multiple canvases and then do the kind of lay them side by side.
So question, what makes it easier to reach the early adopters than to just go right at the mainstream? Why is it easier?
So in the world we live today, attention is the scarcest commodity we have. It's very hard to get people's attention. And so and that's where I think the marketing hat kind of comes in. Is that unless you're coming out with a problem that people know they want and want it, then sure you can go for a much bigger market. But most of us fall into this trap of we can go out there and scream at the top of our lungs on what our product is doing, and no one really cares because no one really either knows they have the problem or gets it.
You can find the people that are the niche. It's really hard not to find everybody.
Right.
Unless you're on a golf campus, you can stand outside.
And then I think that's the other side of it, is that even then reaching those people, it's much easier from a channel perspective to say I'm going after these specific people, I know how to identify them and reach them. Because reaching a larger segment of people, you have to either have a very big horn or you have to have some other engine of growth, which I'll talk a little bit about here, where hopefully your customers are helping bring you other customers. But until then, you have to do all that legwork of finding those customers. which is harder to do when you're trying to reach this big market with a very broad message than one is narrower.
And one more thing too is you're gonna to try when you're getting feedback from everybody, then they're gonna try to get you to do everything. And when you're very resource constrained, you can only do so much. So by focusing on a niche, you can do the things that they need and make sure it works really well for them at least, and get it solved with them, and then kind of expand out.
Okay, so let's look at this example. And so this was a really broad category that kind of the mainstream market. Anyone that shares lots of media content today could be a potential customer. Now that's an example of one that I wouldn't even know how to reach them. Where do I really start? And so these are more specific examples of people that could be potential users of this. So there's kind of digital home consumers, so people that have lots of content and are interested in anywhere access to their content. So whether it's on different devices, whether it's remotely on their cell phones, there'll be potential uses of something like this. So that's one customer segment I put out there. Others that might have lots of media will be videographers, wedding photographers, medical professionals, and then this kind of seems a little bit out of place, and that's because I 5 years ago had my first child, and that's when this product was coming out, and I'd seen kind of this pain firsthand, so I wanted to explore that as well. And so that's the one that I'm going to do a canvas around. And this was one of the markets we tested, and we also tested some of these other ones in parallel, but that's the one that I'm going to kind of draw out and kind of walk through the problems and how we fill this canvas for that market. So when you're looking at these canvases, we do want to create these in one sitting. So unlike a business plan where they're really written over a period of weeks because they're just so ready to write, we want to do this in one sitting because the point here is to get what's in your head down on paper. So just in one sitting, 15, 20 minutes, kind of jot everything down. You can always come back and revisit it later. It's okay to leave sections blank. So if you don't quite know an answer, rather than going out to research a number or going out to do something, it's just fine to say, I don't quite know right now, and move on to the next one. And again, very important to think in the present. So when we look at business plans, we're looking, sometimes 18 months, sometimes 5 years into the future, which is impossible to do with anything. And so what we want to do here is pick a much more achievable milestone. And the one that I usually like to look at when you're first launching is, what's it going to take me to build my minimum viable product? And so I'm only looking that far out. What resources, what are the problems, who are the customers, how am I going to reach them to get to that point? And once you reach there, you then revise this plan to go to that next beachhead or next milestone. So you're thinking not too far out, just really in the order of weeks or months at a time. And then when you're looking at the canvas, I tend to use a customer-centric approach. So you would ask the question, how you tweak the canvas and how you kind of play around with it. So usually what I do is I've got a pretty good understanding of the problems and not a good understanding, I have an inkling of the problem and customer segment solution, and I start playing around with the customer segment. So I come at it from the customer segment box for the most part, and that changes the entire canvas. And you can do different things where you can try pricing, you can come up with different ways, but because a lot of this is based on customer development, that's where I like to focus in terms of customers. It's very customer centric.
Yeah, but that's the part that you change, is what you're saying. You don't keep that as a constant.
That's the part that changes.
Okay.
Yes. And so there's a particular order that I like to go. Unfortunately, I didn't build this canvas, so it wasn't built in the order I wanted it to be. But you don't have to memorize this, because if you use the tool, there's a little guide on how best to fill it. And I also want to get in that particular order. So the first thing I kind of like to look at is problem and customer segments, and they typically go very hand in hand. It's hard to kind of look at them separately. So I list the top 1 to 3 problems that I'm looking to solve for this particular product. And it's very important to look at that from the customer standpoint. So try to put yourself in the customer's shoe and look at it from their worldview and try to even use words that they have. Then I would list existing alternatives that I think they have. And this is an interesting point, because many times when you look at it, when you talk to a startup founder, and I would get in that case myself, and I'll show you an example, where we project who our competition is, but it's surprisingly wrong. It's surprisingly wrong more often than not. It's because we think our competition is everyone else who's in this space, but many times the customer doesn't even know about these people. They're struggling just as hard as you to get noticed. And so there are other forms of competition, and so thinking of what those existing alternatives is important. So as an example, what kills most collaboration products is not a competitor in the field. It's really email, which most people don't even think about. That is the lowest common denominator. That's what people will pick up to do anything and everything.
Maybe another way to think about that is sometimes the alternative is just not doing it.
Yeah,
They're not
and that's
doing
it.
This information, is that, when you first write it, is that just brainstorming? Or
That's what you
just
think.
Get that?
So that's what you think. So what we're doing right now is you, the entrepreneur, are writing down these hypotheses, and then we're going to go test all of these things
But
systematically.
you're cheating, or maybe that's not the right word. You're doing what Steve Jobs said, which is how do you decide what to do? I'm building these products for myself. And you just admitted that you're a parent of young children.
Right.
So you're an expert on these products.
So actually, yes and no. And so that's actually a very good point. And even in the book I talk about that's a good hack, and a lot of people use that hack, which is if you are your own prototypical customer, it gives you a head start, but it doesn't guarantee that you're going to succeed because you still aren't the customer. The fact that I'm a dad and wanting to build this company, there are probably many dads in this world and they're not doing the same thing. So that automatically disqualifies me as the customer because I'm not trying to reach other entrepreneurial dads. I'm trying to reach just other parents in general. And as we're trying to
You have at least a starting point, back to the question, at least a starting point. You should have some familiarity with the problem.
Yes, and that, like I said, that's a great hack. And many times you find that to be true in many situations where people will work in an industry for a while, in telecom for a while. They'll be exposed to a lot of problems, and they've got that domain expertise, and it gives them the advantage to look for solutions for those things. They create a canvas, and then they can go validate those. Having that is, and that's, I even said early on, is the best way to find problems to solve is to immerse you in an environment where there are passionate people with problems, because it helps you see them, and because you are entrepreneurial, you are automatically looking for solutions, and maybe you will stumble into something worth solving.
So it really kind of all pivots around who we put in the customer segment. Because if it's possible that we could target K through 12 and also the military, I mean, those are completely different problem sets that are solutions.
And he was saying when we started, this one's going to focus on parents with kids, right? Yeah, a bunch of lists of them, but this one's going to be about parents with kids for exactly what you're saying.
Right, but also to kind of add to that, in that brainstorming, what you're doing is kind of making that short list or even long list of potential people that would use your product, and then figuring out where, which one you want to start with, either based on your interest, like you might think, well, I want to start with this particular one, with your domain expertise, because then you may be able to reach those customers better. So wherever you feel comfortable starting, you want to start with maybe one of those, but eventually you want to narrow down from there.
So we have one of our companies sitting right here does isotope separation. So the people in the company have never purchased a separate isotope. So how would they start here?
So my question is, so I mean, with that, isotope separation sounds really cool. What is it good for? What will it let me, the customer, do with that? Like, what would I use it for?
Well, I'm even more clueless than they are. I'm sorry. But none of these folks have bought you have had children and taken photographs of them, but we have never bought an isotope.
So was this something that was done in an R&D lab as a technology commercialization type of problem?
But yeah, it's used for nuclear reactors and medical devices.
Okay. But
there's two possible.
Sure, but I think it does come down to looking at it in that way. Is that we are building lots and lots of solutions in these R&D labs, and one of the challenges that we always kind of face taking it to market is kind of doing what I just described, is identifying who the customer for this might be and what problem are we really solving. So even Viagra was developed for something completely different than what it eventually got used for. That was an accidental discovery, but there are many of those situations where it is that kind of thinking that we need to get put on to try to find those commercial uses for those technologies.
So said another way, the customer segments are what's going to change in these, but the constant is going to be the problem of solution.
Actually, the problem and solution could change. So in this particular case, if you're coming in with a solution, and I've again been in that situation where I build this technology, and so everything has to kind of fit that because I've got so much sunk cost into building that. Right. I would say that if I could start clean, I would always want to start clean. But unfortunately, we always bring something to the table, and that becomes a little bit constrained or fixed, and we change everything else around it. So in this particular case, there is some great research that was done. That is a little bit constraining on the canvas, but then we are tweaking all the other pieces to see can we build a viable business model that works. And sometimes we come at it from a different implementation.
You know, and I'd add to that, like, you know, they have a good reason why they're working off of something that's already done, because somebody already did it, and we know it's valuable for stuff, and they want to go make it useful. But, and that's a competitive advantage in some way, that they have that thing that's already very valuable. But if you're just starting from scratch, you usually are going to start with the problem or with the customer segment. Either you're going to really care about some customer segment, and then go talk to them, figure out what problems they have, and then come through it. Or you're going to really care about, you're going to know about the problem, you really care about the problem, and then learn about who really has that problem, and how you're going to play it.
Okay, so step 3 is identifying other user roles. So I mentioned you want to start with identifying the customer, and then you might have other users in the system, and so you want to just identify who they are. That makes it the ecosystem of our product. And then we want to take this final step of honing in on who the early adopter might actually be. So let's look at an example. So this is the Cloudflare case for the parents segment. And so some of the problems that I was seeing my wife particularly go through firsthand, because she was the one doing most of this media sharing, was that sharing a lot of stuff was time consuming, especially now that we're doing a lot of video, getting them in the right formats, uploading, doing all this stuff was just time consuming. So that was the first problem. And then once you have a new child in the house, you don't have any free time. You hardly get time to sleep. So that was a real thing. And then what made it a perfect storm is that there was lots of demand for this content. Family and friends were constantly asking for updates, and so you had to do it. And so you had to kind of find time to do these kinds of things every now and then, or get threatening emails from grandparents or calls from grandparents about why aren't there more updates coming. So those are the three things I was looking to address. And then I listed these existing.
I think you missed one.
Yeah.
I frequently get photographs of children that I did not ask for. So there is the self-expression of their parents.
Right. Right. And I think, and I'll talk about in the early adopter, that was kind of an interesting insight there. But when we look at the existing alternatives, this is, again, something that I'm projecting. So I haven't gone and talked to anyone yet. And so I did think, some people use email, but I thought the majority of them would be on Flickr, Smugmug. Facebook, I wasn't quite so sure because of the privacy concerns around sharing and then having pictures of babies on there. People feel a little weird about that sometimes. But I still listed it as a potential alternative. And on the customer segments, the parents would be the customers. So they are the creators of this content. The family and friends would be viewers, so those would be other types of users in here. And it's possible to have other, other uses, like if you want to get printers and other service providers down the road. But right now, I wasn't even looking that far. I was just looking to get a paid product that the parent would pay for. So that was my ecosystem right there. And then the early adopter, and this was something that it took some time to hone in on, and it only happened after 1 or 2 interviews. But what we found out is that most of the sharers were moms versus dads. So that was one of the things we learned. But the other thing is we framed it in such a way that it was first-time moms with children under the age of 3. Because we found that when people had multiple children, the amount of sharing went down. So the initial excitement of having a baby was too great with the first, and they were trying to share it to anyone and everyone. So they were the early adopter. And then also there was an age criteria. If they were 3 years and above, the sharing also went down. Either people were getting wary of getting all these pictures that nobody wanted, or the children were getting less cute and just not getting shared. But whatever the reason, that was the early adopter we knew that we wanted to go after, and they were fairly easy to identify. You can identify a mom with a young child, and that's still a customer. And
I'm assuming everybody in the world has a computer.
Well, sure, and then there's other, yeah, I think this can be built into lots and lots of demographics, psychographics, but in our world, and so like the channels that we were using were finding people like us. A lot of these were professionals, went to the same daycare, so they were kind of people like us, and I didn't kind of build that whole list, but this was just a way for us to, again, still narrow down what we thought our customer would be to what the early adopter is we want to go after. Just
is it important to separate or at least clarify which ones are customers and users, or are they just kind of linked in?
Well, so the way I do it, I always list the customer first and then the users after, and I put those little, that's just kind of a matter of preference. You can do it any way you want.
But they both go like in customer segment.
But they both go in the customer segment. Now, but that is a good question. If I have a complicated business model, like a multi-sided market, where there might be advertisers and there might be users, and each one has a different value proposition because I may have to sell something to each one of them. In the tool, there's a hashtag feature which you can use to hide. You can tag these things with a particular customer type. So you can say this is advertiser and this is say user or search user, and you can toggle them on and off. So it helps you put them all in one canvas, or you just create multiple canvases, one for each. So if it becomes a complicated business model, then you do want to kind of have different views, but many times you can fit them into
Is
one.
the baby a customer or a user?
The baby will not even be a user. It's just the one that's getting
It's content.
It's
Yeah.
Okay, so let's keep moving. So dead center in the canvas is this unique value proposition box, and this is one that is very hard to get right. And I've actually reframed. I haven't updated this in this slide, but typically a unique value proposition is a single message that tells why you're different and worth buying. And I think trying to convince people to buy from that unique value proposition is too hard of a task. So I really try to look at it slightly less ambitiously, as in a single statement that tells why you're different and worth paying attention to. Because the first thing we want to do is get people's attention. And an example that I'll show here will help kind of show that in action. So when you're creating these unique value propositions, again, starting with that early adopter makes it much easier to target. And that's why it's important to kind of narrow down to that niche, because now I know that a mom with a young child is my target market. I can target all my messaging talking to that one type of customer instead of talking to just this big pool of content media shares, which could be an average tech junkie. It could be a whole bunch of people. I get it down to just being very narrow and very focused. Another technique is looking at finished story benefits. So we've been, if you had any kind of marketing class or education, you've probably heard of the importance of focusing on benefits and not features. And this takes that a little bit further. And so not looking necessarily in terms of just benefits of your features, but what value do people get after using your product. Try to think in terms of that. And I'll show you an example of that too shortly. And then another thing that's useful around the unique value proposition is creating a high concept pitch. So this was something popularized in Hollywood, where they reduced, this is where a producer would pitch a movie in a sentence. So rather than saying, we're building the movie Aliens, they might say we're building a movie that's Jaws in space. So it's a way of taking two familiar terms and kind of mashing them together to get a point across, getting down to the heart of it. So in the tech world, when YouTube was out, they were describing themselves as Flickr for video. So everyone knew what Flickr was, and they were just a Flickr for video. So while this is not a value proposition, it's a very good way to spread your meme about your product. And it's very valuable. So when we do these customer interviews, at the end of it, we want to ask people to help us recruit more customers, to help us recruit more people we can interview. So leaving them with that high concept pitch is something that helps them internalize it and maybe even use that in their own language. So it's something that helps distill what you've been talking for 20 minutes down to something that they can understand and grasp. So that's what the purpose of that is. And then there are these two books. I don't know if you I don't think anyone here has probably read these before. So I meant the
not the old guys. I got it.
But these are the Al Rees and Trout books. These are considered the fathers of modern advertising, and a lot of their stuff it's a very easy read, and it's a very good book if you want to understand positioning and the power of words. They use words. So it's a great book. I won't go through the examples because we don't have that much time, but I recommend those books for positioning. So here I'll show you an example of how a unique value proposition kind of evolves. And this is what we really started with. Is we were a bunch of technical guys, and so what we had built was a very fast way of sharing stuff. And because of the technology we had, we could really in 0 time point somebody to a folder full of stuff and have it be shared without them having to lift a finger after that. So that's kind of in a nutshell what we were trying to convey here. So we had a screenshot of the product, very typical, and we said the fastest way to share your photos and videos, helping parents share their photos and videos instantly. And we thought people would get it. So we showed this, so when we were doing the interviews, at some point we started showing them this landing page. And a lot of people said they weren't really reacting to it very positively. They were like saying, well, I don't see what's different about this. It's just like mine, because mine is fast enough. And we're like, well, how fast is it? They're like, well, if I was sharing a whole bunch of stuff, it might take me 5 or 10 minutes. And we said, well, what about video? If we were sharing video, it might take us 20 or 30 minutes because we have to upload, convert, all that stuff. And we're like, well, with our stuff, you can do that in seconds. You can literally measure that, all that work in seconds. We basically set it and you leave and it gets shared on its own. And they were like, well, that's interesting, but that didn't come across here. And they're like, well, we use the word instantly. Doesn't that mean 0 time? And they said not really. And so we actually went and did a search, and I did an AdWord, and I just searched on Google, and I saw this instant photo. It was basically this photo printing site, and they said, get your photos instantly while you wait in 30 minutes. So for them, 30 minutes was an instant, and it's just one of those overused marketing terms that carries no weight after a while. And we have those buzzwords that a lot of people like to use, like simple or easy, and Apple can get away with it, but not many people can. But they don't really cut to like what is really simple or what is really fast about what it is you're doing. So this was not really working. And so we came up with another version where we said, since we're not doing any uploading, let's actually put that starburst in there and say no uploading required. It should get the attention of people. And then we also changed some of the wording there, and we actually, instead of calling them parents, we called them busy parents, because we wanted them to connect with the fact that they were so busy, and this was no uploading, so they should be bought on that. When we showed this to people, we got 2 reactions, and both of them were bad. So the good news is that it got people's attention. They immediately saw a starburst, and they kind of paused and said no uploading required. But the part that was bad is that the folks that were technical said there's no way that's possible. And they started questioning, how does this even work? And so we went into like a 5-minute spiel of how we do this thing where we put all this stuff peer-to-peer and everything, and you don't have to really upload. And we convinced them, but that took 5 minutes. And on a landing page, you don't have that luxury. People would have left because they don't trust you. They think you're lying to them. Similarly, with people that weren't technical, they were like, well, how is it possible no uploading is required? I don't understand this, so I'm not going to trust it. I'm going to leave. Because I don't know what kind of virus, I don't know what you're doing on the computer. And so both those reactions were negative. And so that was something we learned from that process. So we went through this other version, which was completely going for the problem. And so words do matter, but images matter even more. And so when we showed this version to people, the first thing that came out of their mouth, without even looking at this side, is that is me. That is the mom with holding the baby in the football position, trying to do stuff on the computer. And that creates that initial connection or initial attention that we were looking for. And after that, they went and looked at this other stuff, and they were much more open to learning about the product. And that's what the unique value proposition should accomplish at the end, is getting people to read all your stuff, because most people on a landing page will kind of scan and just read if it doesn't connect with them. Now this is another example of the finished story benefit. So rather than talking about features and benefits that we were doing early on, we went down to what is it that people get after using the product. So it lets them get the more important things in their life faster. And so it was not really about what features we're building or what benefits we have, but what is it they really gain after using this. And that also seemed to draw more of an emotional attachment and allow people to at least want to experience the product, which was way better than what we were facing early on because of that.
So you didn't promise to reach more people. You didn't promise to make it look better or just improve. You promised faster.
Yes.
Did you consider the others?
Yes, we did. So for a while we looked at quality, and that's the thing. So like if you read the Al Reese books, they talk about how words matter, and that's where this really comes from. And how when you're looking at a unique value proposition, the unique is very important. You want to look at unique. And we knew that Smugma was currently positioned in the market as being the high quality provider. Like they allow you to upload the highest res images and maintain them that quality, and others were downgrading. Facebook, Flickr were all downgrading. So we thought we would first try to use quality, and we tried to use a bunch of other things. And they didn't quite differentiate us as much as the speed aspect.
So the value proposition doesn't have to include all your features, just those that stand apart.
Right. So the formula for that typically is going after the one problem that you're solving. Like you might have the top 2 or 3 problems that you test, and again, that's an example of going broad. But again, when you have this, you have only space for one headline. You want to try to get to the one problem that you're solving for that customer, or the finished benefit of using your product. But typically, it can encompass multiple features you're using, but it has to kind of still summarize what you're doing and be different enough for them to pay attention.
So I just have a follow-up question. What if they do ask you also do what they do, like your competitor? Where would you list all the features?
Oh, it would be kind of below the fold. So like, so a typical landing page, this is kind of the above the fold type of thing that people look at. And then this is the part where you're trying to get people's attention. So I don't know if you're familiar with the AIDA framework, but it's a kind of a marketing type of thing. I don't know where it originated from, but it stands for attention, interest, desire, and then action. So this is the part where you're trying to get attention. Then you have the interest section. That's where you sell them on a lot of the features and benefits that you have. Then you want to create some sort of desire, which if you want to study those, you just look at some of the Apple sales landing pages or just their product pages, and they're great at that. The first splash page really gets you into the product, and they start selling you on all these things. I won't say they sell you, but there are things like the Retina display on the iPhones, which are things that you use to justify to your spouse that you bought the iPhone, but they're not things that really you've already made up your mind at that point. So they're kind of great. That's kind of a great way to look at how you build the landing pages.
And this is something that I think a really common problem with startups that I talk to is a lot of times they try to patch together a bunch of little features and say when we have all this, that's why people are going to use it. And they also think that because of that, they have to build all those before they have an MVP, before it's usable. And a bunch of 10% features don't add up to 100%. People choose to do something generally because of one thing, because of one reason that is enough to get them over the hump and make them go try it. And those other things might make them stay with it, make it a better experience, make you more competitive, make you all the other things. But usually the thing that causes action, that's going to get somebody to do something, even something for free, is one really clear benefit. And I think that's a big part of what we're getting here too.
So would you consider doing 3 of these attention pages, one focused on speed, one focused on quality, and one focused on trial?
Yes, and so one thing that I didn't actually talk about here is that the way we tested these, so this is when I was very kind of new to being started. And a lot of what we were hearing is you want to split test everything, drive some traffic to it. And so we set up these particular 3 landing pages. There were different takes on the value proposition, and we were driving some Facebook and AdWords traffic to it. And at this, simultaneously in parallel, we went and started interviewing people. And we talked to 5 moms and in the first week, and all 5 of them liked this one better than the others. But what was even better, they told us why they liked them. And that's something you never get from the quantitative data you're getting. And after week 1, it was nowhere near statistically significant. It took actually 4 weeks to reach the same, and not even, we just stopped it after 4 weeks, so it still wasn't conclusive. But that's an example where when you're trying these bold things like value proposition, you get much faster learning by talking to customers, by sharing them with them. And the feedback loop is way faster because they tell you what works and why it doesn't.
Did you have a product?
Well, so we had some technology, but we hadn't turned it into this.
If I clicked on that, try us for free, what would happen?
Well, this was something we were just showing people on the landing pages. When they click try us for free, we took them to a page where they could give us their email address and we let them know when we launched.
So you said the results were not conclusive. What does that mean? So what sort of data did you see? I'm curious.
Sure. So it was still leaning towards this number, but if you've ever run a Google split test, it's only conclusive when they've reached enough, when you've had enough conversion. So that means typically there needs to be enough of a difference between the landing pages for them to statistically declare one the winner. And that requires a lot of.
Yeah. So I guess I was just curious. I guess there were that few there was that little traffic at the time, or
Oh, this was stuff we were paying for. So we took some AdWords out, some Facebook ads out. And so here's the other side of that, is that first those results were taking too long to be significant. But second, we assumed that we were driving the right sets of users with those ads. And when we went and started talking to moms and we asked them, how did you find your existing solution? Many of them were using email, so they were not even, so they didn't even have any of these type of sites. Others were using Kodak Gallery, which is a very old photo sharing site. And so what we found is that nobody was waking up and searching on Google or AdWords or Facebook or looking for these types of things. And the traffic we were even getting were not even our customers. They were just people who were clicking through for whatever reason, and we were measuring that, which was actually a bad thing to measure. So again, it's important to not make these assumptions about channels. And so ultimately, what I'm trying to say here is that when you're first starting out, it's way better to go and talk to people. There's no shortcut around that. And through that process, you actually uncover channels that you may be able to then use. So if you find out where the customers hang out, how they found their existing alternatives, you might be able to use those same insights to then develop your own channels.
Are channels on the Lean canvas?
Yes. And we'll get to that in a little bit. So in this case, for the unique value proposition, so I list that final finished story benefit for this one. The high-level concept, I just have photo and video sharing without the uploading. And so depending on what people were using, I would tell them, it's like Kodak Gallery without the uploading, or it's like Vimeo without the attachments. So they're just ways of sharing that depending on what people were using. So that's the unique value proposition. Now, the solution box, at this stage, I recommend people not spend a lot of time, because again, that's what we entrepreneurs love to kind of get into the depths of. And so just with that problem, I would love to spec this thing and start building screens and designing them, but I don't quite know if those 3 problems are the right ones. And so I'd rather not spend a lot of time and just outline a possible feature or a possible screen or a possible something that will help address it.
But you had a hunch that you could accomplish media sharing without uploading.
Yes. Yes, and that's a very important step, is that part of the Lean Canvas is not questioning everything. We have to come up, so this is how we think the world will unfold. We just have the, I don't know what the word is, but what we want to do is test those assumptions very rigorously once we write them down. But if those do happen to be true, then we kind of move on and test the other parts of the model.
And I think a common place where people take this too far is thinking that your intuition doesn't matter, or that you don't add any value to it, right? And unfortunately, it's an art, not a science, right? You have to figure out where that line is, but you have to believe in something, right? You have to make some assumptions. Now, this helps you be aware of what those are, so that, as you were saying, you can then go test those. But the answer is not just systematically find my business model. It's like you got to start somewhere, and then this helps you, fine tune that.
Right. And yeah, so there is one interpretation of this, is that you can take anything and just pivot or iterate your way into something that works, and that usually is not the case. It's a strong vision is required. So as I was saying early on, what we're really trying to do is take a big vision. If you have a small vision, you've got a small product idea, you actually don't even need a lot of this stuff. It's just easier to build it and then sort of measure and see what happens. It's only when you have a really big vision that we apply the divide and conquer approach. We first kind of break it into these 9 boxes in Canvas case, and then we systematically say what is riskiest. Let's tackle those things first. And so it's a way of tackling the big vision in smaller chunks. But there is this assumption that you've got this vision, you've got this hunch that you want to go test, and then use the feedback to inform whether you have to make course corrections from what you thought was true. Okay. So in this example, the solution box is pretty small, so I just list a bunch of things. So we already have this technology with the no upload, so I kind of list that up there. We knew that we wanted to make this easy, so we envisioned building some iPhoto and folder integration, so we could just point it at these things and things would just magically happen. And we also thought the timeline view would be nice. A lot of people spend a lot of time sorting their pictures, and a lot of the pictures get tagged with all kinds of things, all kinds of metadata, and time is one of them. So why not just take a whole bunch of pictures, upload them whenever, and we just show you a timeline view of what your kids look like and how they're growing, and it saves you time. So those were like the 3 features we thought we built into this, and then we kind of moved on and didn't do much here. So on channels, channels is one of those things that I feel like, especially if you're building a web startup, that's something that you have to start thinking about from day one, because what kills most startups is sometimes not even building the right or wrong product. So you can use this process and go find 20, 30 people, interview them, come to the right product, even get them to pay you for it, but then you hit this wall where you can't get the next 100, 1,000, whatever that number is. And those things take time, and you have to start thinking about them. And that's also something that people cop out with. And so actually, I don't have that here, but I'll talk about it in a second. But I talk about how I even thought AdWords would be a channel here, And that's what automatically, when I was looking at business plans, everyone was listing AdWords, SEO. That just seemed to be the formula for everything. And as I found out when I talked to moms, that was never even a possible channel for this particular segment. So it's just one of those things where you have to look at that box very carefully and see how are you going to get the customers that you need, and sometimes start building those sooner rather than later.
How did you find out that AdWords were not?
Oh, it's good.
Did you just ask them?
Yeah, so let's do that existing alternatives question. So we first asked them, what are these problems resonate with you? Is uploading all this stuff painful? And they're like, yeah, it takes too long. We asked them what they're using today, and so it ranged from email to, so email was automatically, they're not looking for anything. But when they were using things like Kodak Gallery, some were using Flickr, we asked them how they started using it. And the answer in most of the cases was a friend told them. So there was some evangelist friend somewhere that actually went and did the work several years ago. But from that point on, all the other friends were just using word of mouth to kind of get into it, whatever they were using, and then using that from that point on. So that's how we uncovered that word of mouth was going to be one of the channels we probably have to develop over time as well. Okay. So when thinking of channels, some of the ways that I like to think of it are in terms of investing in freer versus paid. And what I mean by freer is that when we talk about free channels, we think of things like social media, Twitter, blogging. But there is no such thing as a free channel. All of those things take human time to do, and take a lot of human time to do, sometimes to the point where it seems like it's not worth it. But I still tend to prefer those kinds of things like content marketing for certain types of products, because they tend to be more like investments. And so it kind of naturally follows into the inbound versus outbound, which I'll define here in a second. So when you've got something like social media, which is something you're building like a blog or a content site or something that's eventually going to start driving people to your product, that becomes an inbound channel and becomes something that can scale over time. But when you're relying heavily on paid channels, that's always cash outflow. You always have to go out and either buy ads or go out and do things like trade shows, events, or radio ads, all of those kinds of magazine ads. They're all examples of outbound types of channels, which can work if you have got the right economics in your business, but when you're first starting out, you probably don't. So so this is something. So I tend to kind of favor the earlier ones if I can, or start thinking about, are there any of those types of channels available to me or not, or is everything going to have to be outbound? Does that make sense? And then the other thing is this notion of direct versus automated and direct versus indirect. I'll talk about that. I'll talk about both of them at the same time. So when we were first starting out, I mentioned how there is no substitute for talking to actual customers, and that's what I mean by direct. You want to go, the founders need to go and talk to customers and see whether their visions are really what is reality, or whether there's some distortion happening somewhere. And so where automated comes into play is that if you're building some kind of a scalable or self-serve model, let's say a SaaS product or a web-based product, there's a natural tendency to want to have everything be automated and self-checkout. But you run into that same problem I described early on, is that when things go wrong, which they inevitably will, there's no way of knowing what went wrong and why they're going wrong. And so early on, even when I start bringing on first set of customers, I like to sit in with them and watch them use the product. I sit in with them and watch them sign up for the product. Because I've been in situations where the craziest things happen. Everything works for us, but they don't quite work. The numbers are horrible when it comes to people just signing up and using the product, not even getting to a point where the product is bad or anything. It's just basic stuff that doesn't work. And so for those reasons, I tend to kind of favor initially starting out with direct channels, no matter what kind of a channel you're really building, because that's the fastest way, most optimal way to learn. And then if you do use automated self-checkout type of things down the road, kind of implement those.
Another great tool for this is a site called usertesting.com. There's probably other services like this, but basically you can pay a small amount of money and give someone instructions, and you can tell them, like, go to this site and sign up and post a picture. And you try to make it very kind of goal-oriented and vague like that. You're not telling them how to do it. And then part of the people that do this, that get paid to do it, they record both themselves and the screen while they're doing it. And they're kind of taught to speak out loud, like what they're thinking when they do it. And so you get this like really detailed feedback of what they go through, and you kind of see them like click in the wrong place, and they're like, I'm looking for it to go, and like they can't find it. You're thinking, the button's right there, why don't you click on it? And but it reveals like, and you see where their mouse is going kind of, and you're like, wait, they're going the totally wrong direction. You're like, oh no, we need to put the button up there. Or like they can't figure out how to, they don't know what the next step to do is, and they're confused, and you're like, okay, we need to tell them more right there. And it's another way to get this kind of feedback.
Right.
It's better this way, but like that's a different.
And I was going to say that we actually did both. Like we would go and interview a few people, but it is far more efficient to just set up a few tests and then come back after lunch. And the thing is, it's really fast. Like in 2 hours, you get results. So every time we refine the sign-up flow, we would just do user testing, and then we'd still go and talk to users. But there's a great way of just you can never get enough feedback.
I was just going to point out, there's also several services that will just, it's like a JavaScript widget you can include on your site, and then I'll just put like live chat, where you could get like a text message every time a visitor asks, like a little chat box pops up, hi, I'm Nick, how can I help you? And they'll type in like, oh, I can't find this button, or like, I don't know what this website is, and you can start immediately just engaging with them in a direct level, like you said.
It's such an invaluable tool. I'm really glad you brought that up. Like, not for two reasons. One, you learn so much from it. Two, another company that I helped start called WP Engine is a WordPress hosting service. We about maybe three months ago, we put that widget on there, doubled sales, just from that. And it's like, hey, someone's on your site, they're about to buy, and like half the people were like, you could be like, hey, can I help you? And you'd answer 2 questions for them, and then they'd buy, and doubled our conversion rate on the website from that one thing.
I could probably get it for you for free too. So.
What percentage?
You guys all hear that? You said you get it for free.
Probably. Yeah.
Okay.
So did you actually like? You said it doubled conversion rate, but so did you actually?
So someone had to sit there and answer questions
and talk to those that happened.
Yeah, but we had a customer service person. That was kind of they were answering emails and stuff.
I wasn't sure.
Just like he said, he would have the thing open and it would pop up. And just on a side note, another cool thing we do there, I don't do because I'm not actually involved in day to day, but a lot of people in the company do that, and as a result, a lot of people hear what customers say and get feedback. And you can have multiple people logged in at once, and the CEO does that. You know, like he makes sure to do it occasionally so that he's hearing from real customers.
Yeah, so I mean, I have a great story of that. Is that even on this product, and all my products now, I have an 800 number, and that number goes directly to my mobile phone. Whenever people dial 800, people have this. When I tell people to think, well, isn't it ring off the hook and all of that? And the answer is no. And many times, you know, if I don't pick it up, somebody else will. When I rush, whenever I see the customer, I rush to pick it up. And that's an example of, you know, things like tech support is great marketing, but it's also customer development. Because after I answer a question or two for them, I usually ask them 1 or 2 questions about, you know, how they found us, where it came from, and ask them about the product or the problem. So I turn it around and get more learning in exchange for that.
Do you make a point to let them know you're a big guy there and not just a customer service rep?
Sometimes they ask. Like I've done it both ways, and sometimes they ask and they can't believe they're talking to, you know, the founder. You know. That's also again great marketing because they just can't believe that person's answering the phone. And with some of the products, people actually just know me by name now. So when I do answer the phone, they know that I am the Ash. So it's the same Ash that that has the blog. So it does help, and it is something that they get kind of pleasantly surprised that I'm the one answering the phone.
In a slightly different way, when we started Other Inbox, we used a service called Get Satisfaction. We're kind of moving off now. It was great when we started, but we've kind of outgrown it. But it's a user-contributed site where people can answer questions, and I answered all the questions for the first 3 months, right? And it was both of those things. Like one, all our early adopters thought that was really cool because they knew I was the CEO, and that made them feel like we cared about the product. I mean, we cared about it anyway, but that makes them feel that way more. And then two, I was hearing all that feedback directly. At some point, that doesn't scale and you have to stop. But at the beginning, it was really helpful.
Yeah. And again, it's one of those premature optimization problems. Is that so on there, like I've had people in the team who try to optimize their way around this. Like why don't we build a fact page so we get like these questions all the time. Why don't we just put it on there so no one calls? And like, no, I actually want them to call because I get to ask questions in exchange. So they're actually very simple questions like, how do I get like my email link expired? It's just perfect because I can solve that in 10 seconds, and then I can ask them a question which takes 2 minutes for them to answer. So to me, I would only do it if it becomes a scaling issue. Otherwise, I actually like what customers do. Okay. Also, and the thing with the indirect is that again, when you look at most startup founders, technical, typically they say, well, I can't sell, I need to hire a salesperson, I need to outsource my selling or marketing. And that's, again, usually the wrong answer. So over time, if, I don't know if there are any salespeople in the room, but a salesperson can outsell a typical founder any given day, provided they have a repeatable sales process to follow. Now, when we're first starting out, we don't quite even know who the customer is, who the product, what the problem is, the solution is. We have no sales process. We're kind of inventing it as we go. And that's where the founders need to be there. We need to be doing this directly, learning that stuff directly. And once you reach that point where you have figured out that value proposition that's getting customers to nod their heads, to say yes, to sign that check, then you turn it into a sales process and you hire salespeople. And that is if you're using a direct sales channel, or you automate it and you figure out how to convert your site. But until those points, I find it, the learning again is way more if you put yourself in those situations in front of the customer doing all of this work. And then this point here applies more to web startups, and that is this this fascination with like trying to build virality into a product from day one. So I find that it's far more important to look at things like referral once you've got a product that's any good. When we're first starting out, we don't have that. People spend way too much energy trying to build that into it. Like, so Twitter in its early, I don't know if they still do, but when I was signing up for Twitter, before I even experienced it the first time, I was being asked to like invite all my friends. And I'm like, well, I don't even know if this is any good. And if you did it in a coffee shop, imagine going to a coffee shop and as you're ordering your coffee, someone says, well, pick up the phone and call all your friends right now. This coffee is so great. I'm just going to look at them funny. That's what a lot of people do on these sites, and I feel like it kind of needs to be done in the other order. So that's just so also on channel building. I'll show you one slide.
Can I clarify that one bit? I think he's right, and a lot of people misinterpret that. The place where it does make sense is when you have a network effect, thanks to our esteemed professor, and where you being on the service is better if other people do it. And so you inherently, as soon as you sign up, you want them to use it, and actually you can't even really get the benefit from it unless more people are using it, and that's the case what works, which kind of is the case with Twitter, is that other example, but there's other places where it's much stronger, like Facebook is even stronger than that, and so I think that's the inflection point on that is, does the service get significantly better for me day one if there are more people using it?
And then also, I guess just to go back to so something we've learned, and this is like some AppSumo knowledge I'm dropping here. If you want to do the coffee shop thing, you would increase the price of all your coffees by $1 and then give a $1 discount for anybody who will call their friends. And people will do it. Definitely.
There you go.
Okay. Some real world tactics coming out. That's good. So on this, as I mentioned early on, I put the AdWords as a channel, which wasn't quite a good channel for this. Other things were Facebook that I listed, and that's mostly where a lot of people do share and hang out. So for that, and word of mouth would be something that we discovered would have to be built into this. So whether there's a new term that Kathy Sierra coined a while back called word of wow. So it's even different than word of mouth, which is you don't even have to have people talk about your product, they just show other people a gallery and they talk and they just see how that looks. It might encourage other people to use it. So either one of those. Yeah.
For the word of mouth part, where do you find those opinion leaders? Like, how do you know you don't want to go to someone who's going to tell one other person, you want to go to someone who's going to tell 50 others?
Right. So that's one of those things where again it's so obviously in this particular thing what we ran into is that the channels were harder to build because they were things that we had to build over time. Facebook was something we could do easily, so every time people posted things, we could do notifications on Facebook and drive people in. But you're correct with that. The word of mouth was something which you get only, and that's where I was going with the referral. So that's an example of referral, which you don't get unless people actually are liking your product. No one's going to do a word of mouth. Well, they can talk negatively about your product, but people don't even waste their time on things like that. It's rather just not useful. So that's one of those channels that we knew we had to build, but it was not something that we could build day one. But it still made us think about certain features we want to have or certain things we wanted to make things compatible or things like that, so that we could allow for those kinds of things.
So channels would include channels where you can market, but also channels where you can sell. Not differentiate between the two. But in your case, it's your consumer. Most of them seem market type-based, but if they're business to business, it's also reselling channels that would go.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. Yeah. Okay, so talk a little bit about pricing, which may or may not apply to everyone in the room, so I'll go pretty fast. So one of the things so like channels, I see pricing as being one of those things that a lot of people choose to defer to later, and I find that to be, for me, a little bit backwards. Like I think pricing is very much part of the product. So if I have 2 bottles of water here, and one is $1 and one is $3, and I put that in front of you, and it's the same exact tap water from the back. And they might have different labels, but I just put the price. Based on the price, you're going to draw certain quality assumptions about which one might be better, which one you might pick. And that's an example of where pricing is the product. And it's not just part of the product, but it also defines the customer. So, which bottle you pick actually tells me which segment you fall in, whether you're the $3 customer or you're the $1 customer. So I feel like you can separate those two things because they are kind of very connected to each other. And so that's one thing that with the canvas, when you're looking at those early segments, the alternatives that they're using helps to define the anchors you're going to price against, and the actual segments help to define how much you can charge for a particular product, and whether you should charge more or less based on that. And then when we talk about payment, I don't see payment as being the ultimate form of validation, because there are some cases where you get into false positives, like people signing up for a service and then forgetting to cancel or not using it. And I've been in a situation like that where I had a business-to-business product and had many folks sign up for it, but they were no longer with the company. But a year had gone by and they kept paying the bills, and I thought they were great customers until I tried to find out if I could get testimonials and they'd be like, what is this product?
By the way, turn it off.
Turn it off, or are we still? And the question actually was, are we still using this? Because they didn't even know whether we were using it or not. And so for those reasons, I find things like retention to be a much better indicator of building something that people want, more than even revenue. So you might be making money, but you want to make sure that people are actually coming back and using your product.
Back to pricing, how do you price your product so that, against the competition, so that it's an attractive feature that you cost less, but you don't look like you also concede it's a serious alternative and not that it's so cheap that it's probably not a good product.
Right, so pricing is more art than science. That's the next slide. Now that is a great book. I think it's a free ebook. You have to just give your email address, but it talks about some pricing theory. It has some great examples. It's around software, but I think it applies to many other types of products as well, or different ways of looking at pricing. But one of the ways that I like to think is in terms of alternatives. So remember I had that slide. I know the customers and I know what their existing alternatives are. Now when I go and talk to them, like in this particular case, I found that the majority of them were using email, which was kind of bad from an anchoring standpoint because email is free. So they're using a free product. But the ones who were using Flickr and SmugMug, they actually had very clear prices that they were happily paying. Then you have to make the judgment where you want to position against. Like, do you think you're better? And if you're better, again, that unique value proposition, why are you better and does it matter? If you can sell them on that value, you can charge a premium, but otherwise you might be at that same price point. So I do use the alternatives as a way to start somewhere. Keeping it simple, starting somewhere, and then testing along the way. So we test during the interviews. Once we launch, there are other ways that we can test pricing. So discounts are a great way of testing pricing, where you can have it, like even with my book, I have a $19 price, but I've done all kinds of discounts along the way to really test what is the ones that can make people convert over at various different price points. And you can do that with products as well.
Or on the other side, is it could it be better to overprice your product for like the $1 bottle of water, $3 bottle of water?
Yeah, so I always like to bring the bottled water example because it is a case where marketing works. And it's shown there. I mean, even I think UT has bottled water as well. But what you're buying is not the water, you're buying the story behind the water. And Seth Godin has a great book called All Marketers Are Liars, and then he changed the liars to be All Marketers Are Storytellers. A lot of marketers got really angry with that, even if he's a marketer. But it's essentially around that, is that it's the story that's where positioning and all of this stuff comes in. But if you understand your customers well enough, you can resonate with them and you can make them pay the products you want. And again, I love to use Apple as an example too, because they charge premium for their products and people happily line up to pay for those products. But it's again all of the story and what they're really selling.
There's a product, side project I'm working on that
is an app in the app store. We want to put in the app store, and a bunch of them. And there's a couple other apps out there that do it that we think suck, and they're all priced between $1 and $4. And this is a legal tool. Well, I can buy a legal tool for 99 cents. So we haven't tested this yet, but our theory is we want to charge $79 for it in the app store, because we think if anybody goes in and they search for this thing and they see one that's $79, one that's $4, and 3 that are $1, they're going to come check ours out. They may not buy it, but they're going to look at ours for sure. That's been probably one of the first ones they looked at.
We'll compare all the others to yours.
Maybe, but like, I think that's a case where we're going to charge a price that's way, because for what it is, $79 is still totally reasonable. It's like, so.
Yeah, so again, if you have a clear understanding of who that customer is, pricing relative to kind of their pain point is the right thing. People won't use a $99 app.
And sometimes charging more.
You sounded too cynical there for a minute, and then you ended strong. Well, what it does, it's worth $79. You have an income.
Oh yeah, but
value to the customer is part of a pricing formula.
But there could have been we could make the app free and then charge the $79 another way, like as part, it could happen in the app, it could happen as part of using it. We could charge it where it's 99 cents every time you use it instead of a one-time fee. Look, and the reason, one of the reasons why we really are interested in that model is because we actually think it will help with marketing and will cause people to choose it because it's so set apart in pricing.
I was just going to say, another thing is when you're doing pricing stuff, be wary of just looking at conversion rates. Make sure you're looking at the bottom line, because if you sell half as many at 3 times the cost, at 3 times the price, then you're making more money, and you should probably be pricing it that way. Unless you're looking for growth. It just depends on whether you want users or money. But that's something to keep in mind.
There's like Google AdWords video that touches on exactly that. It's really interesting. Google for that.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. So that's pricing. And so here, just to keep things simple, in this particular case, we do decide to charge because we want to build a premium product because it is a niche app. It is around the speed, but then there's also these other benefits which are around privacy that people are willing to pay a premium for, no ads and those kinds of things. And we also looked at what the alternatives were, like SmugMug and Flickr Pro, as kind of pick the price relative to those. And then on the cost structure side, this is where you figure out, again, what are your costs to get to MVP from here on out. I don't look at a year from now or 3 years from now. I just look at what is it going to take me to build an MVP and try to figure out what might a break-even point be. And this is a good time to assess whether this is something you can set up enough. So the first task that we have when we try to build this product to market is setting yourself with enough runway to learn, right? If you can do this on your own, great. But if you can, this might be a time to go and try to get seed money or angel money or some sort. But
when you do your original break-even analysis, are you including salary? You may not be paying yourself, but do you want to include your salary? Do you know your real break-even point is?
Sure, I typically do, and I do it for a number of reasons. So even if I'm not paying myself, a lot of people I talk to really undervalue their time. And I think sweat equity is the most expensive type of resource because it's time, and time is something you never get back. So it's one of those things where I value my time a lot, and that was my catalyst for really wanting to do these things. Because I was building these products over the years, had varying levels of success, and they were taking too long to kind of get to that point. I wanted a faster, better way to vet the ideas, so finding things that were worth solving before investing my time like the book. So I did all this work up front, and then did nothing rather than waste time.
Also, I just want to comment, and this connects to what Josh was talking about last week about knowing if you get another person to work on clients, how many clients does he get? Is you need to separate your fixed.
Another salesperson.
Or the salesperson.
Bringing in clients, how many?
So you need to separate your fixed from your variable. That way you know if you spend X more on salaries, how much more revenue are you going to get, and not just divide the revenue by the number of people you have. Because you have fixed costs and fixed revenues.
Last time I checked, there's 50,000 new books a year. And if those people did break-even analysis, there would be many fewer.
Sure. And again, so the idea of this, again, is it's more of this grounds up way of, so rather than working backwards, so we're just taking the big addressable market and saying I'm getting 1 or 2% of that and I'm building a healthy business. It's looking at it from a ground of, what are you going to do tomorrow? Like, do you have enough runway to even build the stuff? And if not, how am I going to fund this thing? So those are the first questions we have, and as you go along, you have to kind of revisit your cost structure, and this is something that gets optimized over time. Because you may be starting, and I start with things like Heroku for those that know, because they just solve so much problems for me that I would otherwise have to build on my own, and I've built them in other companies, and I'd much rather not even be concerned with those anymore. So it's great that it's also for free if you have a scaling problem. Okay. So we'll talk a little bit about key metrics. So these are the numbers that help define how your business are doing. And I don't know if you've seen this before, but this is a typical conversion funnel that someone by the name of Dave McClure created, calls the pirate metrics or startup metrics, because the first letter is spelled the word R.
So a topic for next week, actually.
Yeah, I actually, yeah. So I'm not going to go into a lot of depth. I'm just going to introduce like what this funnel really is. So it's a great way of looking at what a typical customer does on your site. And so even using a non-software example, if you have a flower shop downtown, what we're trying to measure here are the macro metrics that kind of make your business work. So say I have a flower shop downtown, what I want to measure with acquisition is, am I getting people's interest? I might have people walking down the street, and if someone stops and looks inside and tries to come inside, that is an acquisition step. So I've got their interest, I've got their attention. Then once they come inside, the activation is the first user experience. So they looked outside, they saw something that was interesting. If they come inside and all the flowers were dead or everything was a mess, that's a bad user experience. And so it has to connect with what the reason they came in. So that's what activation would be, so that they come in and see everything as they expect it to be. Now, they may not necessarily buy anything, but that's the activation. They get that first experience. Retention is if they come back over time, and that's the one metric that I say is very important early on. Revenue is just what it sounds like. It's the transactions they make, and they may make a sale today, they may come back and make a sale later on. Referral is whether they tell their friends about your store. So even though they may not buy it, they may think this is because they don't have any flowers to give, but they might tell their friends about it. So that's what this basically looks like. And so before product market fit, if you remember the chart from way back, the things we're looking for are really trying to get activation and retention working. So so if you're building a product, you want to make sure people are getting it first, the user experience, and more importantly, they're coming back and using your product. And if you're charging for your product, great. Revenue happens to be something that comes along for the ride from day one, but otherwise, that may or may not be there. And really, after product market fit, you shift more from value metrics to growth metrics. Now, because acquisition is on top, you obviously have to have enough traffic coming in. But the point here is that you don't need to optimize that channel. So even if I get 10 or 100 visitors a day, depending on what product you're building, that might be sufficient to do the learning you need to get the product right. And only when you have the retention numbers be good, then it makes sense to really pour a lot of effort driving both the acquisition and referral, with the exception of so even in the lead canvas case, we do have a built-in invitation of other users, but personally, I don't call those as referrals, because that's just part of using the system. You need to bring in other people to use the system. To me, a referral is when you use customers to bring in other customers into your system. So whether it's through affiliate programs or some kind of other thing that feeds other customers into the funnel.
Do you mean you have channels bringing in?
Yeah, I mean, it could be a channel. Like, so one example is affiliate. If you're a user of mine, like many WordPress teams have this, and you post a little thing on your blog, people click through it, you get a little commission to use it. So that would be an example of building that system when you've got a part that's actually worth selling. People would actually want to help promote it.
But also just post this to Facebook, tweet about it, if that's not part of the core product.
Right.
Invite your friends, all that.
Okay, so just finishing this example here, I kind of use activation and retention to kind of define what the initial key metrics are I want to kind of focus on. So I want to make sure that if people use the software, they can successfully create their first gallery, they can share content. So that would be an example of the create first gallery would be the activation. The share content is more repeated usage. Are they coming back and sharing more stuff? So it's nice that they create the first gallery, but if stays stagnant for 3 months, then they're not going to be a paying customer for very long. So I want to make sure that they actually have reasons to come back. And again, there are lots of tactics to help bring people back. Email is a great one, where you can send kind of just reminders or other kind of tactics for reasons for bringing people back with your product. Facebook again is great at that kind of stuff. Invite viewers would be the example of something that we have to see other people coming into the system. So it's sort of referral, but not a referral of like an affiliate program type referral. So those would be the initial key metrics we were looking at with the product. And then the last box that we're going to talk about is the unfair advantage. So again, when you look at a typical business plan, we talk about, there's a section for competitive advantages, and a lot of people put things in there that aren't really unfair advantages. We put things like lines of code or passion. You know, I'm super passionate about this thing. And unfortunately, those are things that are not really competitive advantages. Someone that I kind of took this from was Jason, who I think a lot of you know who he is. But he had done a blog post a while back on unfair advantages, and for him, a true unfair advantage is something that cannot be easily copied or bought. And to me, that's a great way to think in terms of unfair advantages. So if you think your code is an unfair advantage, you could actually get into a fight with your co-founder, and he runs off with all your code, sets up shop in Costa Rica, and goes in competition against you. So that's a real possible outcome we could have. If you think price is your unfair advantage, Google or Microsoft could just come.
Yeah, we're going to charge less. It's not a competitive.
Right. So all of those kind of things can be taken away. If you think again, AdWords is a competitive advantage, you can have a bigger competitor come in with bigger wallets and just outbid you in the short run, hoping to drive you out, and Google will happily take the additional revenue.
What about like different sources of materials? Like you can get something from somewhere that other people, if they really keep it.
Yeah. So some examples of unfair advantages, like one is insider information. So if you've got any kind of insider knowledge, that can be an unfair advantage, which does happen in many industries. Other things are network effects. So Facebook right now has a huge unfair advantage over any social network because of the volume of people that are built in.
They didn't have that advantage
initially. Right. And so the way they started, I mean, so to me, like I do tell that story. So they weren't the first one that actually started out. They were like the 10th or 11th social network. But really what I think they focused on early on, whether by design or inadvertently, is they were really focusing on that retention piece. There's a lot of social networks at the time were about acquisition. They were all about bringing people in and gaming the system. So people were bragging about 5,000 connection LinkedIn profiles, and it was too big of a number to just put a plus after you got so many. But that's what people wanted to kind of have in their badge. While Facebook started in a much smaller market, which was the Harvard campus, and this was not a social network they built, but one that already existed, and they made the engagement much higher. And so that is kind of my interpretation of how they got Facebook to be that sticky from the start.
Do you have any opinion on Google's methods of inviting their friends for like Wave and Plus? Because that's failed twice, but it seems like a good concept. Do you have any opinion on it?
Like with the Plus, I think it's actually been quite effective because it's so simple to get people in. It's actually scary how simple it is to get people in.
Well, just because the product fails doesn't mean that that's it.
No, I'm saying it seems like a good concept, but it didn't work out, I guess.
Yeah, so I would say that in the case of Wave, I think it was a different reason why that failed. But Plus, I do think that they have a very frictionless way of bringing people in compared to like anything I've seen. I've just been amazed how simple it is to bring people in.
I'd argue that since you know about it,
well, I mean, that's the thing where I was one of the customers that knew about the photo gallery, but stopped using it after the trials.
Okay. You're talking about this is the invite.
No, I was saying the people you described before who used it briefly.
So anyway, so this is one of the hardest boxes to fill.
Would price become an unfair advantage if it was financially impossible for another company to do it? In other words, like if you found a way that was extremely, like so much cheaper to produce, and you can sell it at a price that was.
Yeah, they could turn water into oil or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, obviously if there was but it became an advantage because probably of something else, like some technology.
Scale can create that sometimes. So as you get really big, you can do things more efficiently. Apple has an amazing
operations that allow them to produce the stuff, the products they're making, even though they're higher priced than other things. If someone else tried to make what Apple's making, it would cost them much, much more. And it's because they I believe, have some real defendable competitive advantages that they've developed over time from their scale and the relationships that let them get better pricing and do things more efficiently.
From a commodity standpoint, though, our low price is always not a fair advantage, right?
Correct. Low price is not a competitive advantage because the other person could just lower their price.
Unless your cost structure is.
Unless there's,
but then the cost structure is the competitive advantage.
And that's also assuming that your competitors don't want to take a loss on their products, which is not true in every case, because sometimes they will just be stealing customers.
But then their competitive advantages, they're bigger and they have more capital and they can afford to do that.
But I mean, say in Apple's case, they've got a hugely efficient cost structure, but they also charge a premium. So they've got a lot of room to go down if they need to. But then there are other folks like Walmart who actually come out and say our value proposition is the lowest cost. But that's because they actually drive those costs, and that has become the competitive advantage, which no one can really match.
Or Amazon Web Services continues to drive their prices down, and their scale allows them to do that. And at this point, that's it. I don't know about a competitive advantage, but that makes it really hard on everybody else right now. They keep making it cheaper and cheaper, and everyone else is trying to charge more and more.
Well, patents is a competitive.
Yes.
Yes, I mean, so on that, so one of the problems with the patent is that it has to be defended, right? So you have to, people can't infringe on your patent, and the burdens on you to prove it. And that creates a situation where it's actually, one, very expensive to get, and also very expensive to defend against. So there are some folks who just decide, like Skype, for example, to rather not patent because you're actually sharing the method of how you're doing something. They'd rather just obfuscate it and live on that for a while. So
that varies by technology. So this is mostly about software services where patents are not, have not shown to be very strong, but in life sciences, patents are killer.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if you're a startup doing a website without very much money, then patent's probably not very helpful to you.
Yeah. So with this box, the point I was trying to make is that it's fine to leave it blank, but I still put it in there because it's still helpful to think about them, because it's things that you may want to even aspire to. So sometimes they are even value types of things that become unfair advantage. So a good example there is the Zappos story. So Tony Hsieh, who was one of the not the first, but I think second or third CEO of take control. He believes very much in happiness, just creating happiness for yourself, for other people. And he did a lot of things in the business which would actually sound like very bad business sense. So he would allow people to take customer service calls for as long as needed. And even had a bet with his co-founder one that they could make their customer service rep, like calling anonymously and make them order pizza for them. And they actually did make their customer service rep order pizza for them. They happily did it because they believed in doing whatever the customer wanted. So they did all these things. They had 1 year return policies. They tell you if you don't know the size of your shoe, buy 3 or 4 and return the rest. So they have all these things which just sound very counter. And that created this huge loyalty. Even though they weren't the cheapest service, they actually created this loyalty with customers, and Amazon bought them for a good price. And that became the competitive advantage. They just have this customer happiness be their thing. So many times it could be a value-based thing that you want to aspire to, or you want to do things differently, and become one over time. But it's fine to leave it blank. If you do know what it is, that it may not be, so even in this case, this could be a network effect or word of mouth type of thing, I don't know. But it's something I list out, and those are the types of things that I want to build into this consciously and see if that becomes an unfair advantage over time.
Most of you will not have a competitive advantage. And that's okay. Most first-time entrepreneurs do not have a competitive advantage, I believe. As a second-time entrepreneur, usually or if you're most young first-time entrepreneurs, if you've been in industry for a long time, you might have some insights. You might know a way to get something that other people can't get. Or you might have developed intellectual property. You might have done these other things. But it's okay not to have one. It's much better to have one.
Is it an insight?
Not if, as soon as you express it, it's shared.
Well, what if that insight allowed you to achieve escape velocity, like Facebook has escape velocity?
Because of an insight.
They had some sort of, I don't know what it was, but they had some sort of the heart that would be an insight.
I don't think so.
You don't think they have an insight?
I don't think an insight is a competitive advantage. I think an insight, unless it's unless it's a patentable, unless it's like a trade secret or a patent, I don't think it's like a hunch. I don't know what you mean by insight, but if it's trade secret or patent, yes. If it's like some unique novel way of doing something, people can't copy.
People talk about vision, so can that be a competitive advantage?
If you're Steve Jobs.
I think it. What's that?
If you're Steve Jobs.
No, even lesser.
Right.
But if you have a vision that allows you to execute efficiently and go straight in this direction while your competitors are confused and focused in the wrong way.
But I think the challenge is there's no way for you or anyone else to evaluate that. You can't know if you have that. So you're either delusional or you're brilliant, right? Like, and so if you believe that, that's great. But I don't know how you can. I don't see how you can use this here because you can't prove that that's true except by doing it. So maybe it is, but I don't know that it's a useful tool.
You're right about that. Then you have to find investors who are willing to go along with it.
Right. Yes.
Can you like differentiate for me what the difference is between an unfair advantage and a barrier to entry? Because I think that a competitive advantage is something I'm offering that no one else has. It doesn't necessarily have to be something no one else can do right now. I mean, that's my like. So what's the difference between that and
a barrier to entry is a competitive
advantage? Yeah, I don't draw a difference. Yeah, there's just different things.
Well, not all competitive advantages are barriers to entry, but a barrier to entry would be a competitive advantage.
So Facebook is a good example. This guy wrote code for 3 weeks in his dorm room. Anyone else can do that. I mean, especially big companies like Microsoft.
Right.
So he did not have an unfair advantage going in.
Sure.
So
you don't have to have an unfair advantage to win.
He had an advantage over MySpace, obviously. Otherwise, people wouldn't.
Well, so no.
So
fundamental flaw in logic. You do not have to have a competitive advantage to win. He did not win necessarily because he had a competitive advantage.
Why?
You can't draw that conclusion.
Why did he? What caused him to win if not?
Well, in general, that's the problem, right? Is you don't win because of one thing.
Well, but like, give us all an example. If it's not a competitive advantage, what the hell is it?
Because there were 10 other networks that tried to do this.
But even the Facebook example, there was a different solution. So MySpace was what I was describing early on. Is they were going for everyone and everything in it. Facebook, because of the way it started, so it was a different solution to a similar type of problem, which was connecting people. That was the fundamental problem. But the way they went about connecting it is they were connecting people with more, creating more meaningful relationships than you were getting in some of these other sites. So it was able to be more popular and grow that way.
And there were a lot of places where they chose a different strategy. They chose a different strategy than MySpace. They chose to do different things. That was a different strategy. That was not a competitive advantage.
Okay.
And you're asking really good questions. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
I think this has become semantics now.
Yeah. But that's what it is.
Speed of execution, they must have movie you saw, they stressed having coders who are really world class.
Yeah.
Perhaps better than MySpace. Maybe they were the first ones to use Ruby on Rails or some new tool that gave them an execution advantage. So speed of execution.
Well, none of those things you said were competitive advantages. All of those things were some things that somebody else could have copied. Somebody with more money could come hire those people away. Somebody else could go use Ruby on Rails.
They had the insight to do it.
Right, and that's brilliant and smart and not a competitive advantage.
So it's semantics. I claim that is a competitive advantage.
Well, in all cases, I defer to Bob. So it is now a competitive advantage. But it's not a competitive advantage over me.
What's the answer on the test at the end of the semester? That's all we're
So if that's the case, then what distinguishes unfair advantage and unique value proposition?
Unique value proposition is positioning market value.
Right. So what if Facebook's whole thing wasn't a competitive advantage, but a unique value proposition?
So what is like a very like loyal and engaged user base? What is that like an unfair advantage? Is that a success?
So Flickr has a very huge community, right, where they can really have groups and user feedback. So that's actually Flickr's unfair advantage over someone. Right?
If you feel like you got a community, whether you have loyal followings,
and was that something that you were trying to do in your software to create user feedback, or is it more just personal?
Well, so this was in some way this was kind of an unaddressed market. This was building something that was easy to use for moms and moms, like there've been other sites that I've studied where they're great at evangelizing products once they think they are good enough. And so I talked to a few other sites, like people like Circle of Moms, the name is started a Facebook site. So the initial growth for the first 6 months, they got 20,000 users. And then in a year, they went from 20,000 to 2 million users because they got this tipping point of moms just sharing this product. So for us, it was figuring out how do we get the product to a point where enough of those channels will start kicking in. And that becomes, in some ways, an unfair advantage because then it becomes this product that moms are evangelizing, that becomes something that they would recommend to other moms, bloggers. You're piggybacking on the mommy blogger thing at the time as well, and that was a very powerful channel. So all those kinds of things were what we're thinking behind that.
I actually have a bunch more slides.
No, this is it.
This is it, great. You have 12 minutes. I want to be sure to see them.
This is the summarizing. So this summarizes. So once we get that first canvas done, where we had all these other customer segments, we may want to go back to them and draw them up, and compare them based on those 4 things or 5, depending on what your criteria are. And we show early on. And then, that's the end of the slide. So this is where, if we were doing a workshop, we would get people to come in and talk about their canvases. But I'd recommend you guys have you have the book, you have the code, go try it, go use it, and let me know if you have any questions. That's all.
We're going to stay seated for, I got 3 more little things to tell you about. Do you have anything else to say? Okay. So one, I really want to thank Ash for coming. Ash is someone that I've known for a long time. He's come and spoken at many other things we've put on. He comes to all the Capital Factory companies. One of the things he said today was how time is the most precious thing that he has. I know he's got some young kids. I have young kids. He came here tonight to be with all of you, and that really means a lot, and we really, really appreciate it. 2 of our mentors, Manuel Rosso and Kevin Dash, both worked at IMView, which was where Eric Reese was, where a lot of this stuff was developed. So those are 2 more people you should talk to about it. Manuel does a talk about Lean Startup, where he talks about concierge MVP, and talks about the story of how they started Food on the Table, and it's an amazing, amazing story. And we're not going to be able to, maybe next semester we'll bring him in, but we're not going to be able to bring him in this semester. You can find that video online. I really encourage you to go watch it. And if one of you do, if you could post it to the group so everybody else can see it. Really, really good talk on the same topic that's worth seeing. And then the last thing is, in case somebody didn't mention it, but all the pizza and these water bottles today came from HomeAway. Who knows who HomeAway is? Okay, HomeAway just went public. They're like huge Austin success story. Austin Ventures funded, really great entrepreneurs. There's a great video from the CEO that spoke at our demo, at the Capital Factory demo day recently. It just got posted to the Capital Factory YouTube channel. They're a really cool place to work, and they were very generous to buy us all the pizza. So we really appreciate that for them. And if you could, so that I don't have to bring this back to them, before you leave, if everybody would come grab a water bottle, that's the last thing that I would really appreciate. So, thank you.
Didn't we tell him like 5 minutes?